Melodies.
Following my ex's decision to divorce, I spent
Madam Clerk, you all ready?
Ready, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair, we are ready.
Madam Clerk, you ready to begin?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are ready.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's GE public hearing. I'd like to convene the public hearing today, Wednesday, March 24, 2021. We have 14 bills on today's agenda. Look forward to a interesting afternoon. Would my rank members or co-chair have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just make the usual statement that I've been making at the beginning of each one of these hearings. And I want to make it completely clear that I'm not in disagreement with my Senate chair, even though she's alluded to it several times, about the Zoom meetings having some benefit, because we certainly have seen an increase in participation in all the committees I serve on. And there are people that are reaching out to us who never have before. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But I do want to make sure that I do continue to vocalize my very polite objection that I do believe that there is also some part of the state that is missing out because they do not have the technology to participate. It's one of those things. We are increasing our accessibility in some ways and decreasing it in others. And I want to see us work towards a solution that allows access to as many of our constituents as possible. And that's all. I just wanted to have that on the record. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Representative Mastro-Francesco, any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair. It's nice to see you, and Senator Sampson. Just welcome everyone. Looking forward to listen to everyone's testimony today. And it's a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Flexer, any comments? Okay, great. Thank you. We'll go ahead with our first witness, John Garagosian, State Auditor.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, sir. Please continue. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, Senator Sampson, Representative Mastro-Francesco, and members of the GAE committee. I want to thank you again for raising Senate Bill 1071, an act implementing the recommendations of the Auditors of Public Accounts. For the record, I'm John Garagosian. I'll be here to testify in favor of the bill. Thanks to you raising a bill of our annual report recommendations every year, we've passed 24 of those recommendations have become law since 2014, and we appreciate you doing that every year. This bill is similar to the bills you raised the last 2 years. I will briefly highlight what it does. Section 1 strengthens our office's access to state and quasi-public agency records. Occasionally, agencies do not always believe they are required to provide certain records and information to our office. This often delays the completion and release of our reports. 4 Attorney General opinions have supported our access to all those records and information. This provision simply emphasizes that authority. Section 2 requires state contractors to provide their contracting state agency with related records at no cost. I understand DAS has submitted testimony on that with a proposed change, and we don't have no opposition to the change that they proposed. Section 3 modernizes the state auditing statutes and requires state contractors to provide our office with related state contracting records at no cost. Similar to the provisions in the last section, we've had issues getting data from state contractors for many years, and this provision will strengthen our ability to access that information. You know, we're concerned that vendors have been withholding the state's information from contracting state agencies in our office. And we're also concerned that if an agency were to terminate a contract with a vendor, there may be impediments to accessing the state's data, which could affect the operation of the program. In addition, many contracts include performance goals. Without complete and accurate payment data, the agency has no way to determine whether the vendor met its performance goals. Section 4 requires state agencies to inform our office if they intend to contract for auditing services and gives our office an opportunity to perform those services. While we rarely conduct these audits, this provision will keep us informed about other audit work in state agencies when we assess our own agency audits. Section 5 clarifies the definition of a private special education providers that are subject to our audits. It adds indirect state funding as a provision as recommended to our office by the Office of the Attorney General. In May 2017, our office began an audit of a school that we believe was a private provider of special education. The school challenged our authority to conduct the audit because it did not directly receive state funds. We sought advice from the Office of the Attorney General, and this is the language that they proposed. Section 6 eliminates the language in the Connecticut Retirement Security Authority statute that would have our office play a management role. Government auditing standards require auditors to maintain independence, and the provisions in that statute is something our professional conduct standards does not allow us to do. Section 7 requires the Department of Administrative Services to expedite the transfer of abandoned property to avoid it from becoming dilapidated and decreasing in value. Section 11 includes employees of state consultants or contractor under the Code of Ethics. It also prohibits those employees from accepting anything of value that would influence their actions on behalf of the state. Our office has encountered situations at state agencies in which the employees of outside consultants or independent contractors recommended the purchase of goods or services to that agency. In one case, an employee of an outside contractor received a finder's fee from another contractor they recommended without the contracting state agency's knowledge. These employees do not currently meet the definition of a state employee in the Code of Ethics. And I understand the Office of State Ethics is also in favor of this provision. We work with them a little bit on crafting it. Section 12 requires the Department of Administrative Services to review and approve school construction safety documents earlier in the process. And I guess process changes over time have kind of turned the process on its head a little bit. And we think it's important that safety and health concerns are addressed earlier in the process. Sections 15 and 16 are technical and replace the former Office of the Ombudsman at DCF with the Office of Community Relations. Section 17 eliminates the need for a separate audit of reimbursements from the Bradley Enterprise Fund. We already audit the Connecticut Airport Authority and the Department of Public and DESP, and this is a redundant requirement at this time. Sections 8, 9, 10, 13, and 14 amend various auditing provisions in individual quasi-public auditing statutes to conform them to the standard auditing provisions in Section 1-122. The specific quasis in this bill are the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, Connecticut Airport Authority, Connecticut Innovations, MIRA, and the State Education Resource Center. Public Act 10-172 amended the quasi-public statutes to require biennial rather than annual audits of all quasi-public agencies. However, the auditing provisions in the individual statutes remain. This proposed language would eliminate conflicting statutory language. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Auditor Garagosian. Representative Mastrosowski, your hand raised, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for coming in today and for the work that you're doing. It's so important that our agencies are audited, and I think your department does a fabulous job. I'm sure there's some challenges. I notice, and I do read a lot of those reports. When you give a recommendation for an agency to follow the proper procedures and policies in place, and they don't have the opportunity to fulfill that the next time they are being audited, and it's the same problem that's occurring, is there anything that your department can do to ensure that those steps are taken? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sesto, our office has no enforcement authority. We report, and we follow up on every single finding and recommendation in our last audit report. And one of the changes we made as a result of, we had hearings on several of our recommendations and audits over the years. And one of the things that came about as a result of those hearings is in every audit now, we'll not only say whether the recommendation was repeated, but how many times. So hopefully, that'll get the reader's attention. And if something's happened in 5 straight audits, somebody will hopefully make a change. I have to say, we understand agencies can't always implement our recommendations, especially in this particular year when we might have recommended a legislative change or something of that nature.
Thank you for that. And through you, Mr. Chairman. No, I understand that sometimes it's hard to make those changes, but they could be good changes, and it could help the flow of the office and the way it's run. So they're very important. So I do understand that you're just really the reporting agency. I didn't know if there was anything else that you do, your department does offer to help the process along. But I appreciate you coming in today. Your department does a wonderful job, and I'm very thankful that you're here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative. Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And hello, Mr. Auditor. Nice to see you today. And thank you for appearing before the committee. I want to start by expressing my sympathies for the loss of your counterpart in that office and a friend of mine. I'm sure it's been a difficult time following his passing. The bill's pretty straightforward. I took a look at it last night, and you actually answered a couple of my more simple questions in your opening comments. And I don't, you guys do a great job, and thank you very much for your efforts in making our government smoother and more accountable to its citizens. The only thing I wanted to ask you about, John, was the time frame changes on some of the audits going from annual to biennial. Just curious, what the reason for that is. Is it that they don't have significant transactions that require an annual audit, or it just makes more sense for you?
Well, I mean, thank you for those kind words about Rob. Obviously, Rob and I got along very well, worked very well together, and he really valued all of you and his time in the Senate and his time before this committee. And I hope you, were thinking especially about his kids, it's a very difficult loss for all of us. So I appreciate those kind words. Regarding quasi-public audits used to be done every year until 2010. And there was a change, I believe it was in the budget, and I believe I might have been, I know I was there when we did it, was intended to make all those audits biennial. And what happened is the individual statutes for the different quasi-publics was different in every case. And we found that as we were looking through them, I think it was 2 years ago now. So the intent of the legislature is really to audit them every 2 years. We have had cases where we've gotten involved more frequently. The Port Authority comes to mind, the lottery. We've gotten involved in a broader way than our usual audits. So we have the ability to do it. It just, it's more of a conforming issue.
Right. In fact, it's funny. That's what I was thinking of, the Port Authority, just as an example of why we might want to do them more often. But that makes perfect sense. There's nothing precluding you or prohibiting you from getting involved if there appears to be a problem in between those audits. And so you've just answered that, and I appreciate it. Again, thank you very much for being here, Mr. Auditor. I appreciate your work and your efforts. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. John, so if I ask one quick question, I think one of the sections of the bill, most interesting, is Section 1, which I think would broaden your ability to get records and accounts. Can you just speak a little as to what the process is when you make these currently ask for certain records and that are denied, or just walk me through that somewhat?
Well, I mean, the issue doesn't happen too much. As I said in my testimony, there are 4 Attorney General's opinions which confirm our access to records and other documentation. The most recent one related to a medical report at the Department of Corrections that was claimed not releasable as a result of attorney-client privilege. The Attorney General ruled that we could have access to that report, but we couldn't report on it publicly. So this provision in this bill just basically strengthens that our access, which we believe we already have.
So it's more or less not a codification, it just kind of clarifies the AG's opinion, more or less.
I mean, the opinions generally dealt with issues of privacy, medical records and the like, and those kinds of things. We handle all of that and we protect it. We handle student records, medical records and the like. It doesn't happen very often, but in light of, it just takes up a lot of time and effort when we have these kinds of issues. Sometimes it takes months and it bogs down some of the auditing work.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here today for testimony. Again, I want to compliment to my colleague, Senator Sampson, that we are all, you and your office staff, are thoughts and prayers sometimes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative Fox.
Next up, Senator Matt Lester.
Good afternoon, Chairman Fox and Chair Flexer, Senator Sampson, Representative Mastrofrancesco, and members of the Government Administration Elections Committee. It's a pleasure to be back before you, and always an honor to follow my good friend John Garagosian. I'm just here to testify in support of SJ 13 this afternoon, which is a constitutional amendment that seeks to modernize Connecticut's voting laws and give more flexibility to the state to improve best practices in terms of expanding access to the right to vote and modernizing our election administration practices. Among other things, the amendment would explicitly allow 16-year-olds to pre-register to vote, allow the creation of regional voting centers, and allow early voting. These are all innovations pioneered by other states that Connecticut has not yet adopted that would make voting easier, that would provide additional flexibility to the state legislature and to this committee to adopt best practices to facilitate voting. I also want to note that I have read some of the testimony submitted by it. The regional voting center idea in particular was not my idea. It's been pioneered elsewhere in the country, but I want to give a particular credit to our Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, who proposed a similar proposal, I think most recently in 2019. I take her suggestions to heart and support her amended language suggestions and would encourage the committee to look favorably on her comments. And with that, I would be happy to welcome any questions about this proposal. And I really just want to congratulate this committee on doing so much to build on the successes of the last election, one in which the state did break out of its usual rut and try something new, and we saw voter participation soar. This amendment is one of a slew of proposals that I know is before you. I just want to be helpful as the committee considers ideas about ways to facilitate voter engagement and participation.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Mastrosky, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lesser, it's very nice to see you. I just had a quick question through you, Mr. Chairman, on the regional voting centers. Ideally, in your mind, what would that look like? Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you through you to Representative Mastrofrancesco. You know, this is something that many states, Colorado, for example, have moved to adopt, and what it simply does is it allows a voter to go to a polling location and not without regard to whether or not it's their local polling location. And what happens as a matter of course in Connecticut under our current practice is you go to the wrong polling location. The poll worker spends a lot of time trying to figure out what the correct person's polling location is. And you've got people zooming around town. Sometimes they move towns, but they've forgotten to update their registration. And you've got a little bit of a chaotic scene on election day. And what other states have figured out how to do is to create a system where you can go to one polling location and a ballot specific to you will be issued. And so that's simpler for the voters. Obviously, figuring out how to do that is a complicated question, one that would require collaboration with our registrars of voters, our town clerks. The constitutional amendment doesn't try to bake into statute how that would be done. It simply opens the door to the state pursuing that. And it's something that's worked in other states to simplify both the administration of the elections on the part of the municipality and part of the state, but also just as importantly for the voter.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And through you, Mr. Chairman, the regional voting centers that you have seen in other states, are they maybe a collaborative of maybe 5 or 6 towns within that area where they go to one central location to vote, or is it just one location per town? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, so through the chairman to Representative Mastrofrancesco, it's a good question. You know, Connecticut is unusual in that we don't have a robust system of regional government. What I would say is this is going to be a complicated question. So you could do it any number of different ways. It's not for me to tell the GAE committee exactly how to construct it. This is going to require a lot of thought, a lot of stakeholder engagement. I'm not coming in like a freight train telling registrars how we should redo our elections, but I think we should have the option to considering the fact that people often live in one town and work in another town, people often live on the edge of 2 towns, to give some flexibility to the GA committee to find a system that works for Connecticut.
Okay, well, Senator Lesser, thank you so much for answering my questions. I just wanted to get your perspective on it from your experience and from what you know in other states. It's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Sampson. Your hand is raised. The floor is.
I don't know if you recognize me.
I did,
Mr.
yes, sir. I'm
Chairman.
sorry. I was telling me. Please proceed, sir.
Yeah, your audio is a little funky today,
Body.
Mr. Chairman, just so you know.
Great, thank you.
Senator, thank you very much for being here through the chairman. And just a pretty straightforward question, which is, I understand the early voting piece of the bill would require a constitutional amendment. Of course, we have another bill that aims to do that. I'm just not certain that you need a constitutional amendment to for the other part of the bill, which would allow those under 18 to begin the process of pre-registering, since they would not actually become electors until age 18. But I could be wrong about that. I'm curious if that's included because you believe it needs to be a constitutional amendment. Through Mr. Chairman.
That's an excellent question. I will actually defer that one to the Legislative Commissioner's office. I don't know the answer to that question. I was wondering the same thing. So it's a good question. I don't have the answer, but we should look into that, Senator.
All right. Now I appreciate that. I mean, I took a look at the constitutional language we have and the amendment where we changed the age to voting to be 18. But you're right. I'd like some clarification too. So we'll definitely follow up on that, assuming the bill moves forward. And thank you for being here, Mr. Senator.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Lesser, just a quick question if I can. Last week we had before our committee a bill that would allow 16-year-olds to vote in municipal elections. And this proposal does not provide them the ability to vote, just provides them the ability to pre-register. Can you please just speak a little bit about that idea?
Absolutely, and I don't have anything against the proposal that you heard last week. It seems like a really interesting proposal. I think the idea is similar, though. It's to engage young people in the democratic process, and I think that's something that could take part as part of a civics or social studies curriculum. You know, oftentimes students are learning about American government or politics, and I think as in the process of learning about that, I think there wouldn't be anything better than saying, hey, you should move on past expressing just your opinions in the classroom, but actually taking the step to register to vote. And I believe we could do that through the pre-registration process. Obviously, if the committee wanted to take the next step and expand the franchise to 16-year-olds, you have that option. But that's not what I'm recommending here, but that's certainly something that you in your judgment might elect to do. That's above my pay grade, and that's why you're the chair and I'm not.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any further questions or comments for Senator Lesser? So, thank you for your time and thank you for your time and testimony today, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative Fox.
Up next, Representative Candelora. Good afternoon, Representative. How are you?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Fox, Chairman Flexer, Ranking Members Sampson, and Master Francisco. I'm here to testify in favor of House Bill 5653. As we all know, over the past year, having gone through this pandemic, we've had a couple of statutes that have been exercised through the executive branch dealing with the civil preparedness and the public health statutes. I think it's important, and I'm pleased that the committee raised this bill to contemplate the issues associated with the exercise of these powers and how to make these statutes a little bit stronger. I think obviously we never contemplated being in this situation where this power has been exercised over the past year. What the current language of the bill is seeking to do essentially is to sort of decouple civil preparedness from the public health, and it makes some modifications to that. One area that I would suggest is that under the civil preparedness statutes right now, the language is going to be sending the recommendation of or the ability to reject to a group of legislators to make that determination. What I ask is that we look at having that authority be given by a vote of the legislature. So the civil preparedness would be a declaration that the governor could exercise every 30 days by approval of this committee. I'd suggest it be every 30 days by approval of the legislature. In many states, I think about half of our states throughout the country have this type of power. And I guess with that also, we clarify that serious disaster does not include a pandemic, so that it would fall under the public health statutes as opposed to straddling both of these statutes, which I think clarifies the process and avoids confusion. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, thank you for being here today. This is a great bill. I fully support it. There are some details, though, that I think are worthy of conversation. You probably know there's a companion bill, Senate Bill 301, that I submitted that's very similar. Your bill contains the decoupling of the civil preparedness from the public health emergency, which I think is important. Does this bill also kind of switch the current process, which essentially allows the governor to make the declaration, and then the committee of leaders gets to oppose it if they choose? Does that change in your bill so that it actually requires an affirmative vote to allow the extension? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, that is correct. Line 17 through 18 would require that, the extension be given an affirmative vote. But what I would suggest, to your point, that it be an affirmative vote of the entire legislature, because I think the public health statute maintains the current structure of it being a rejection as opposed to an affirmative vote. And I do believe it's important for the legislature to come in and take that vote. There's been some discussion over, if we're not in session, it's sometimes difficult or inconvenient, but I think that, we might be able to compromise in that area of saying, have the extension be 60 days. So the legislature, if we're not in session, would only need to come in every 60 days for an extension. But I do think it's important that if there's going to be a delegation of legislative authority, that we approve that delegation as opposed to the executive branch taking it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. And I completely agree, and would like to see the entire legislature involved in that process. Even if, the makeup of the legislature remains as is or something like that. I just think having more voices with the opportunity to be heard, and people speaking on behalf of their constituents across the whole state is the concern, which is lost under the current process. In my alternative, Senate Bill 301, the only thing that I did differently was really make it, rather than a vote based on the makeup of the legislature, turn it into a nonpartisan vote where there's equal representation from basically all four caucuses get one vote. And it's an affirmative vote, which would require one person to break ranks with their party to allow that to happen. And the reason why I envision it that way is because this is not a question of whether or not the party in power should be able to continue or anything like that. It's about the legislature delegating its responsibility to the executive branch. So to me, that's not a party issue, and I don't think it should be clouded by parties. But either way would make me much happier than what we have today. And I just wanted to throw that out there as another set of ideas on how to approach this. Thank you very much, Representative, for bringing this bill to us. I think it's critical because the last several months have really, a year rather, has really pointed out the need for the legislature to have a little more control over what happens. And I would like to see the minority party have a little more control on what happens also. And if you want to speak to that at all, please be my guest.
I appreciate that opportunity. I think you make an interesting point. It is a legislative delegation, and therefore, if there is a commission established, it probably should be sort of a nonpartisan commission delegating it. But I do think it is important to contemplate having it be the entire legislature. As many of you probably know, Judge McKelshir's decision that was issued, I guess 2 weeks ago, it is dicta right now, but it raises some interesting points in, number one, defining the scope of how long these powers exist, which I think this type of change would do that, and also defining the process in terms of having the legislature take an affirmative vote for that delegation. So I do think while we're moving forward in this, while the bill was proposed before that decision was rendered, I think it's important for us to keep it in mind, because even though it is dicta and not binding yet, it eventually could be, but I think he raises some very interesting issues that it would behoove us to take up.
I completely agree. And again, thank you very much for your commitment to making changes in this area. I think it may be one of the most important things we accomplished this year. And I'm hoping the committee does take up one of the bills and gets it over the finish line. Thank you very much, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions or comments, members of the committee? Seeing none, Representative, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your advocacy and testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Up next, Representative Durinder Borer. Good afternoon.
Hi there. Hang on one second. Just fixing my audio. Can you see me okay?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Thank you. So hello to you, Representative Fox, and hello to the entire leadership and distinguished members of the GAE committee, and for allowing me to speak to you today in strong support of Bill 6211, which is an act to improve the gender and racial diversity on the state boards and commissions. Back in February of 2020, when the Secretary of State released the report of the composition of our boards and commissions, I had a meeting with the Secretary of State because in my role as co-chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus, I wanted to see what the female composition was. And when I looked at that report, women were clearly unrepresented on the boards and commissions, but also the lack of racial diversity on the boards was striking as well. And I'm going to give you a few examples of some of our boards and commissions that only have males, only have white males on them. Our School Building Projects Committee, our State Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors, our State Property Review Board, our Victim Compensation Commission, our Whiting Forensic Hospital Advisory Board, our Home Inspection Licensing Board. And I just give you some of those examples so it really hits home as to the variety of boards we have and the lack of gender and racial diversity. So seeing these statistics encouraged me to submit a bill in 2020 to work to change that. But as you know, due to COVID, we closed down, the legislation didn't go forward. In the interim, I've partnered with Representative Farrar, who is also going to speak following me, and we've made this bill stronger. And basically what it does is it uses our census as the main platform for our goals to change the composition of the boards and commissions. And before you also is a governor's bill, A83, and I want to let you know that we have had several conversations and we have met both Representative Farrar and I with members of the governor's office, and we are in collaboration and have a consensus as to what should go into one bill. And we're happy to go over those specific recommendations with you, but here's the bottom line. Our democracy thrives when it fully represents the people of our state, and this composition of the boards and commissions do not reflect the population of our state. And within 20 years, we've only made a 9% improvement in the gender and racial diversity in the composition. And that progress is too slow, and it is unacceptable for a state as diverse as we are. The diversity on states' boards and commissions will not only more accurately reflect the population, but it contributes different and varied perspectives to decision making, and it avoids groupthink. So this bill, for the first time in our state's history, will set a goal for the state boards and commissions and really bring them to a place to where we as a state want to be. And I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for being here. I don't know, when I see bills like this, it makes me wonder, because we have a long and storied history of debating subjects like affirmative action in this country and so forth. Does this bill intend, through you, Mr. Chairman, to change the makeup of these boards and commissions by using some sort of quota system based on the census data you referenced in your opening comments, through you, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. By using the census data, that provides the framework for goals for the composition of the boards and commissions. And we have consulted with the governor's office, and they're working with their legal team to make sure we're appropriately setting those target goals. Using the census, I keep saying consensus, using the census of the data really demonstrates the population. And I'll give you an example. So women make up 52% of the population in Connecticut, yet they only make up 42% of the boards and commissions in the state. So certainly there's an opportunity to improve the female representation. The racial diversity on our boards, currently that composition is 78% of white non-Hispanics on our boards and commissions, and certainly that doesn't reflect the population of our state. So I think we determined to use the census specifically as a basis for those goals.
Thank you for that comment. And through you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate everything you said. I don't know if you really answered my question, which is, does the bill establish quotas? Just reading through it, it doesn't appear to. It says something about a good faith effort to try and attain diversity that coordinates with the census data. Am I correct in that, through you, Mr. Chairman?
I think, yes. So I think what we established is you cannot identify quotas, but you can use the census as your goal. Does that help?
Yes, I appreciate that. Just for a point of clarification, do you know the reason why, Mr. Chairman, through you, Mr. Chairman, why we don't use quotas?
Why we don't use quotas for gender or racial? Why we haven't in the past? I can't answer why we haven't done that in the past. All I can answer is going forward, what we should use as a target to attain a better composition.
Right. Yeah, it sounds to me like the emphasis is on racial diversity and gender diversity more than it is on hiring the most competent person for that role. And that concerns me because that would mean that someone is going to be chosen because of their race rather than their qualifications. Could that happen under this bill, through you, Mr. Chairman?
No, I want to clarify that. In our bill, we specifically say qualified and diversity in gender and racial composition. And we actually, as part of the bill, talk about outreach and educational steps to reach populations. And what it does is it creates a level playing field. So given the eligibility based on talent and experience, making sure there's a level playing field for all populations, and that we're reaching out to groups that could represent different ethnicities, different races, and different genders.
Thank you for that answer also. And I appreciate your comments, although I don't think they align with the bill. I think the bill does the exact opposite of creating a level playing field, respectfully. I think the bill is intended to make race and gender diversity a more prominent decision-making factor than the quality of the applicant. And that's a concern of mine. And, you know, there's a tremendous focus in politics these days on the term equity and racial diversity and so forth. And, you know, look, the best solution is to remember that every person is an individual, and that discrimination is not only wrong and immoral, but it's also unconstitutional. And we have laws against it. this bill, I think, is the exact opposite. I think this bill actually creates discrimination against various ethnic groups because it is essentially stating that we are going to try and mirror the population rather than choose applicants based on their qualifications alone. What do you have to say to that, Representative?
I would say that we'll respectfully have to disagree. By creating a level playing field, I think if you have an opening on a board or a commission and there's, let's say there's a male and a female that are equally qualified and it's an all male board, then I think you should consider the female, because I think you should have diverse perspectives, whether it's gender or racial. I think given the experience and the qualifications, if they're equal, then yes, you should look to select the person as long as they're qualified. This bill does not say pick somebody solely on their gender or solely on their race. It's saying that if the person is qualified and there is an opening and you want to have diversity on this board, that you should strongly consider this person.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And again, I agree with that set of circumstances, but I think that is the law. And that currently the way our boards and commissions are chosen is based on the applicants that apply are measured based on their qualifications and they are chosen. You made a comment in your opening remarks objecting the fact that so many boards and commissions are made up of high percentages of white males. Forgive me, but that's a racist comment. If you had made that comment about any other ethnic group, yeah, no, it wouldn't be unacceptable. And I just like to point out that, you know, racism, even in the quest for so-called equity, is still racism. I really want to think that there's a better solution to this, which is to remember that we have worked very, very hard to in this country to write laws that eliminate racism by ending discrimination and ensuring that we are all protected equally under the law. And this proposal aims to undo that by creating a set of circumstances where we are pitting races against one another and genders against one another for the purpose of benefiting one more than another. And you cannot stand before the committee or anywhere and tell us that you're trying to end racism by imposing a bill that increases racism. And I just wanted that on the record. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And Representative Fox, if I could respond to that by pointing out those committees, I was trying to demonstrate the lack of gender and racial diversity on some of the boards and commissions. If there was an all-female board, I probably would have outlined that as well. I think we need to have decision makers in key roles that bring diverse perspectives to that decision making. So by pointing out those commissions, I was not being discriminatory or sexist. What I was trying to demonstrate is we have boards and commissions that do not have gender or racial diversity on them. And I think given the experience and the qualifications of those who are being considered for those boards and commissions, that we should consider gender and racial diversity as well, so that there's different perspectives when it comes time to the decision making.
I appreciate that, except through you, Mr. Chairman, is the representative suggesting that the boards and commissions that are currently made up of mostly white males are that way because of discrimination?
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not saying those members are not qualified. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that when you have more diverse composition on a board and commission, you have a more diverse perspective and background when it comes to making decisions as a board and commission.
I appreciate that. Okay, so the question is, does that trump the qualifications of the applicants?
And the answer was and is no. This is a level playing field. Given the qualifications are equal, then if the qualifications are equal of the applicants or those who are eligible for appointments, you should look at the current makeup of the board and commission and consider diversifying that board and commission when you're making that decision.
I can appreciate that, except that if you are suggesting that you had two identically equal applicants and you're going to give preference to one because of racial diversity, that is discrimination.
I think
And
that
you
if
can look
that,
it up. I mean, their dictionary definition of racism and discrimination are not hard to find. And that's precisely what that behavior is. And if it was happening in some other direction than what this proposal seeks to achieve, it would be seen very clearly by everyone on this committee. I appreciate your comments today, Representative, and I appreciate your desire to increase the gender and racial diversity of our state government and the boards and commissions. And I'd like to see that too, but I want to see it happen naturally based on the qualifications of the applicants and not through some artificial means where we establish loose quotas based on census data that impacts different ethnic and groups and genders differently for the sake of doing it, despite their applicants' qualifications. Again, this bill is worthy of tremendous debate, as is this entire subject, where it seems like, you know, we've gone off the rails in search and quest for something that doesn't exist. You know, anyway, I'll leave it right there. Mr. Chairman, I want to see us treat our constituents, our neighbors, our friends, and our colleagues as human beings that are individuals and ignore their gender and their race. That's the only solution to this going forward. If we keep writing bills that point these things out, racism will never end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Palm, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Representative Borer. Thank you very much for bringing this forward. One of the things that I think is important for us to know about boards and commissions is that they are one of the primary points of entry for people to enter public service and politics. Serving on a board and commission is often a person's first foray with public service. And so given the fact that the Connecticut legislature currently has about a 32% female to male ratio, according to the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers, would you say that if we were able to diversify our boards more, both by race and gender, it might result in a more equitable composition in our General Assembly?
I think it could, yes. I think these boards and commissions are making very important government decisions, right, that regulate a lot of aspects of our state. And I think if you have all one gender or all one race, no matter what that race or that gender is, then you're not going to bring that different perspective. And when we're making decisions in our government to represent a population in our state that is diverse in both gender and racial, that those decisions should be coming from you know, a diverse background, right? If we're making decisions for the state of Connecticut residents, we should be making them based on the different perspectives of experience and backgrounds that people bring to that decision-making process.
Yes, I agree completely. And I am concurrently on a judiciary public hearing, as many of us are toggling, and we're dealing with a series of domestic violence bills. And a young man testified about the murder of his mother. And I asked him if he thought that domestic violence was primarily a crime committed by women against men, might the system treat the crime differently? And his answer was unequivocally yes, that it would be very different. So I agree with you that when the prevailing culture and power structure is predominantly male and predominantly white, there is a tendency to treat women and people of color disparately. And we see it in law enforcement, we see it in corporations. Both Forbes and Fortune have said that the more diverse a corporate board is, by
Point of order, Madam Chairman. Point of order. Excuse me, I can't let a comment like that go.
Excuse me, Senator Sampson. You had an opportunity to discuss, ask questions earlier, made some comments.
I understand. I'm making a point of order. And the point of order is that Representative Palm just made a very, very unbelievable statement that systems that involve white people end up in negative consequences and more violence and so forth. Again, I mean, did anybody pay attention to what happened in the Planning and Development Committee yesterday? You understand that racism, it works in all different directions with all different groups? You ought to apologize to every person listening, Representative. You got no right to be able to make broad-based statements about any ethnic group, whether it's black, white, or anything else.
Mr. Chair, may I respond
Yes.
through you, please?
Senator Sampson, thank you for your comments. We're going to continue with Representative Palm's statements, please. Senator, you were given an opportunity to speak earlier. You were granted much latitude by the chair in your comments as well, and we appreciate your thoughts and comments that you made, and we ask you to, Representative Palm, to have the same courtesy. Please continue, Representative Palm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The point I was making is that even in the corporate world, some very moderate, if not conservative, research groups and reporting bodies, including Forbes and Fortune, have pointed out that the more diverse a corporate body is by both race and gender, the more profitable that company becomes. So my comments are simply made in the hope that we recognize that diversity by both race and gender is not a game of playing favorites. It is recognizing the competence and the inherent value of differing voices in all of our systems, whether they be educational, law enforcement, and in corporate, and indeed government itself, which is my point in the first place, that diversifying boards and commissions might result in an increased diversity of people entering public service, which I think would be only to the advantage of all of us. And so I thank you, Representative Borer, for bringing this up. And I would say that I think it's important, it behooves all of us to think about who makes the laws, who makes the rules that govern all of our lives. And I agree that it should be more representative of those lives that are being governed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Palmer. Representative Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Representative. Thank you for raising this bill. I just want to move from the theoretical to like the real world. Rep. Palm just touched on, I don't know any corporate body who doesn't talk about the need for diversity of all sorts to reach the best decisions, school groups, committees, etc. I think this is a well-documented management tool to elevate the conversation. And in the pursuit of some work in another committee, I recently had the opportunity to speak with one of our commissions, and we were noodling over some bill language. And I thought it was interesting when the conversation ended, she said, "We are desperately looking to diversify our board. Do you happen to know anyone?" And it struck me as funny, but it also highlighted another, I think, well-documented instance, which is part of the reason diversity doesn't happen in many cases, especially in volunteer groups. No one's getting paid to do the job, right? So they just ask who they know. And if it's populated by a certain type of person, whether older, younger, white, Black, disabled, not disabled, whatever, you go to who you know. So I'm just curious, in your work to develop this bill, if you had an opportunity to speak with various boards and commissions and, you know, did they think this was a good idea, a bad idea? If you have any input, I'd love to hear it.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And we have had a lot of discussions about that very topic. So, and that's why we put a specific aspect in there about reaching out and identifying organizations, professional organizations or community organizations that you can promote or educate them on some of these openings, because you're exactly right. And let's use the case of, let's say it was a commission that was all female. I didn't find any, but let's say there was, right? And there's an opening, then that group might only be knowledgeable of professional female organizations. So not knowledgeable, but they might work mostly with female professional organizations. So when they're thinking about who to fill that vacancy with, they're thinking about the groups they know and they work with. So reaching out to other organizations, this will provide an opportunity to go beyond that. So you're absolutely right. And that's a point that we've discussed.
I appreciate that, because I definitely, what was conveyed to me by this one commission was that they sort of need the help, and sometimes they certain members of the committee need a push to incentivize other members of the committee who we all sort of give in to history sometimes, like we've always done it this way, why change? And I, for one, of course, think the rate of change has been way too slow. So thank you for your work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Representative Boer, seeing no further questions, comments, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your advocacy and testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Fox. Thank you to all the members.
Next up, Representative Kate Farrar. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the many members. I appreciate you. I appreciate your attention to so many of these important bills. I am following Representative Boer here in support of House Bill 6211, an act concerning gender and racial diversity on certain state-appointed boards, commissions, committees, and councils. And don't forget an online system for consideration of appointments within the legislative department. Representative Boer very much outlined, her intent behind the original bill that came forward in 2020 and our partnership on this bill now in this legislative session. I think what I've heard from my colleagues on this committee really makes me want to drill in and focus on, I think, a part of the intent of this bill, which is what we know from the research, corporate America, and in our own government sector, that diversity on our state boards and commissions, it won't only more accurately represent our constituents, but I would say it really brings those valuable different perspectives and protects our boards and commissions against real research phenomenon such as groupthink. Plus we have in our state such an incredible talent pool. And to me, especially growing up here in the state and seeing such incredible people that we want to keep in our state, we should want our boards and commissions to ensure that it's truly representing, again, the diversity of our state and utilizing our incredible talent pool. We are not alone in this effort here in Connecticut. The National Council of State Legislatures does capture that at least 8 other states have taken steps to set goals such as we are, and to ensure that there is greater education and outreach happening. It's worth noting, actually, that it was the state of Iowa way back in 1987 that took some of these steps to do such as was noted. As we kind of are taking stock of our democracy and where it's headed, as Representative Boer noted, we are working closely with the governor's office because they included language in Senate Bill 883. And we want to make sure that we come forward with a strong bill that can, again, very much have our state boards and commissions as taxpayer public funded bodies represent our state. But we're doing our best, as noted in the bill, to best do the education outreach to bring much more talent into our state governmental bodies. I just thank you all for being so committed to the work of our state. And I know we want to ensure that many other individuals in our communities have that same opportunity. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Representative Thomas, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, I just want to welcome my fellow freshmen to the GAE committee. So thank you for raising this bill. But you did touch upon one thing that I didn't address earlier, which is the other concern that was raised by this woman on, it was the State Historic Preservation Board. She mentioned that what has happened with that board in the past, and I've heard this many times and I've experienced it many times, which is you know, there's the one woman, the one person of color, the one this, the one that, who gets tapped for everything. Part of the reason why I have to leave this hearing for another meeting soon. And I was just curious, again, in your development of this bill and conversations you may have you heard anecdotally anything similar? Because I think the education piece of this is the part that commissions here in Connecticut are craving.
Yes, thank you, Representative Thomas, and for your support and for that question, because I think that with the way that our appointment process is set up, there's a multitude of appointing authorities, and then we have our Secretary of State, which also has a role and has been engaged in some public education as well as reporting. So some of the intent behind this bill is to better coordinate on that education and outreach. So the appointing authorities really are coordinating with one another, as well as with the Secretary of State, who already has some of these connections out in the community to such community groups. So for us, it's, as you noted, it's expanding the pool. It's making sure that as folks are doing their appointments, that they feel that they have stronger community connections to ensure that they have a wealth of qualified individuals to really choose from.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Representative Santiago, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that this is a very interesting conversation. And it ironically, today is Pay Equity Day, where women are earned for every dollar. And when it comes to racial diversity, Black and Latinos make even less than that. So it is pretty ironic that we're having this discussion today. But I think it's important to diversify these commissions and boards. It's not only because they have to be Black or white or Latino, or they have to be men and women, but you're also talking about commissions that also have members that are disabled, the disabilities community. And so if I'm on a commission and we don't have people that actually do have disabilities, which could be mentally, it could be that they're in a wheelchair, they're more able to give us their perspective of what it is to be disabled and make those important decisions, especially when laws are being made, how many parking spots a building or manufacturer needs to have that are handicap accessible. I think that this is a broader spectrum of dealing with issues on boards and commissions than just Black, white, men, women, and gender. And I was on a committee back in the early 1990s where there were decisions that were being made for parents, and there were no parents sitting on that board. And how can you sit there and make decisions for people that are head of household, single women or single men that are raising their kids, and make decisions on what they need and don't need? When you hear it right from the person that is dealing with these issues, you bring a better perspective to what these boards and commissions should be made of. And I don't like when people are always saying, well, the person has to be qualified. We're hoping that people are qualified no matter what their gender or race is. And it always seems that the word qualified comes when it's other than people that are talking about it. So I do support this bill, and hopefully it will go through. And in the state of Connecticut, we have a long way to go. As progressive as we are, we still have a long way to go. So thank you, Mr. Chair. It was just a comment.
Thank you, Representative, for your comments. Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative, for being here. And thank you also for your very intelligent and thoughtful testimony. I think you did a great job of explaining the bill in a way that actually makes sense. I have the same reservations that I mentioned to your colleague, but you did make some very good points as to why diversity is beneficial. And I agree with them completely. I also want to kind of ask you something in the form of a question to get at what my GAE member, Representative Santiago, just said, which is that wouldn't in a case where you were talking about the needs of parents, wouldn't being a parent make someone more qualified than someone who was not a parent? I think that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is that qualified means qualified by the fact that they have something to do with the committee. And if that requires someone who's disabled because it's disabled needs, or because it's parents, or because it's inner city, or because it's whatever, would those things count toward qualifications in the view of this bill, through you, Mr. Chairman?
Hi, Senator. Nice to see you. I know I haven't come before this committee before, so appreciate your question. And I think you were referencing a little bit of what Representative Santiago noted, but to answer your question, I think what I would be clear about is this bill in no way is getting in the way of the decisions that we want our appointing authorities to be making, that is setting forward what the goals of that particular board or commission really has at the forefront of their decision making. It really is ensuring that when we look across all of our Connecticut boards and commissions, that they are reflective of our population.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that answer. And again, I mean, I don't know that that matters as much to me as someone else. I want the most qualified people. And if that meant that they were all African-American, or all Asian, or all disabled, or all white, it wouldn't make one bit of difference to me, because I would be looking at their qualifications. And that would include, in my mind, people that are actually representative of the decisions they had to make, as was referenced by my colleague. Again, I think that any kind of policy that you put forth that starts to pick away at that and says that, you know, we have to start looking at people based on their gender or their race is discriminatory in its face.
And solving problems.
Can someone please mute? Thank you. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. I think that the danger of trying to reverse discrimination through policy is creating discrimination, and we should all be very wary of it. I have one more question through you, Mr. Chairman, and that is just noticing lines 39 and 40 of the bill, which seems to remove the language about having members appointed by the governor and members of the General Assembly. Does this language imply that the governor and legislative leaders will no longer have the ability to appoint members to boards and commissions? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm happy to respond, and then also happy to defer to LCO and committee leadership. That is certainly not the intent that Representative Bohr and I had. Again, we've been in coordination with the governor's office, and our hope is to ensure that we all get on the same page to ensure that all appointments are coordinated.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The language is not really clear to me what it is trying to do. But that is a concern to me, because I do believe the General Assembly does have a role, as does the governor's office, in appointing folks to various commissions. And again, I really appreciate the way you handled yourself in this testimony, and you definitely made a much stronger case for the bill than I have heard before. And I thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Mastrofresco, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, so much for your testimony. I certainly enjoyed it very much. I won't be long. I just have a couple of quick questions. And during your testimony, you mentioned something, and I apologize, I probably missed it, about groupthink. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, you're on mute. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, yeah. So one of the things, again, from research, particularly when you look at groups, particularly in the workplace, they've done research on how when you have entire group that has, if it's a similar age or similar experiences, that the groupthink can come up with a sentiment where people in the group are hesitant to bring up alternative points of view because there's such kind of similarity amongst the whole group. And that type of occurrence can lead to poor decision-making sometimes for that group ultimately. So when you look at studies that McKinsey has done on corporate governance and kind of the makeup of our workplaces, what you'll see is that this phenomena can point to why it's so critical for there to be greater diversity, because you want to make sure that those range of experiences are included in the decision making to come forward with the kind of most beneficial decision.
Thank you for that answer. And through you, Mr. Chairman. So who is to decide the decision making, I guess, is what I'm confused about. I look at sometimes there are positions that people fill, whether they're male, female, right? You know, I'm not a mechanic, right? And if I had to go for a job that required working on vehicles, I'm going to hire somebody that is an expert in that area, right? So their groupthink is going to be focused on what their expertise is. So I'm confused as to who makes the decision on what they should be thinking or proposing. Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Representative. I'm happy to respond to that. What you might be asking about, particularly with this bill, is, again, it's not making any sort of decision on the appointing authorities of the qualifications. The qualifications need to remain strong and true. And if there was a commission that indicated that it needs to be made up of mechanics, it would need to be made up of mechanics. But there could be a range of experiences, for instance, by age or geography, right, that could really bring a diversity of perspectives to that group that would provide greater beneficial outcomes for their decision making. That's really kind of the sentiment behind the research on groupthink.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I was just a little confused because you said it could lead to poor decision making. And who was anybody to say it's a poor decision, right? Depending on whatever board or commission that they're on, that decision could be proper at that time for whatever issue they were dealing with. So when in the bill that talks about qualifications, and who determines what the qualifications are, whether they're good or bad. So if we have two people on a board that want to go on a board or a commission, they have the same qualifications. Who determines what those qualifications are? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Great question, Representative. And again, this bill isn't changing anything from the standpoint of how the appointing authorities are determining those qualifications. So I really would defer to the appointing authorities on some of their processes. But again, its intent is to ensure that we are taking into account those qualifications and then additionally reflect, again, the great talent pool and diversity of our state.
Thank you. And just one more quick question. I guess, why now? Right? Are we saying that there is a problem with our boards and commissions that I see Representative Yu shaking her head, that because they are not, there's not enough male, female, ethnic, race diversity on that group, that is a problem? It has been going a problem. So are you saying that the commissioners, whoever appointed these people, were not doing their job all along? Because I'm a little taken aback by that. Are we saying that they made a mistake? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think no time is like the present, as you know, Representative. You know, it's always about how can we do better in this legislature. And I think this bill just intends to use the latest report that came from our Secretary of State to move forward and just try to do better.
Okay, thank you. And I was just saying, so in the past, it wasn't an issue, but it is an issue today. Would that be a correct analysis? They've been doing it right all along, but today they are not doing it correctly?
Can you be more specific about what you're referring to?
So appointments for boards and commissions. I can't remember what the number that was given out, but there's so many male, so many female, it's not diverse. Are you saying that the way we have done it in the past was wrong, and the people who appointed those people to go on those boards or commissions have made a mistake because they didn't appoint them based on race or gender or anything else? And
Yeah, what I'm saying
today
is
we're
that-
doing it correctly.
Sure. What I'm saying is that, the latest report that came from the Secretary of State really did indicate, from the standpoint of best reflecting our population, that we have a ways to go. And so this legislation really sets in place some mechanisms that we hope we can encourage the appointing authorities to take into consideration to move forward.
Okay, thank you. I won't belabor it. There's a ton more questions I can ask, but I guess I'll just move on at this point. But I thank you so much, Representative, for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Representative Palmer, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Representative. So I just want to make sure that I understand. Your understanding of this bill is not that it disallows or overrules the competence or skills or experience of other people, right? Do you agree with that this bill does not disallow or overrule candidates' competence and skills or experience if they do not happen to be women or people of color?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Representative. See no further questions, comments. Thank you, Representative, for being here today. Appreciate your time and your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you all. Be well.
Seeing that we've now exceeded the first hour, we're going to move on to the public testimony. First up is Deidre Murch. Deidre, I saw you were present earlier. Is Deidre still with us? Deidre, we'll come back to you. We'll go to Marissa Turnbull.
Hello,
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
thank you all.
Please continue.
Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and honorable members of the Government Administrations and Collections Committee. My name is Marissa Turnbull, and I am honored to appear before you on behalf of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and NAGPRA Coordinator. I'm here today to offer in support of HB 6203. I want to convey to you our sincere appreciation to the committee for its consideration of this very important bill and its willingness to sponsor the legislation. This bill concerns NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. NAGPRA is primarily human rights legislation designed to remedy the inequality in treatment between Caucasian remains and Native American remains, a history of inequality that carries the message of racism that Native Americans are culturally and physically different from and inferior to non-Indians. Importantly, the Native interest in gaining repatriation of ancestral remains and objects recognized by NAGPRA are largely an effort to obtain the same rights as Euro-Americans have always had to their past. In this way, NAGPRA seeks to recognize Indigenous human rights, which are inherent rights of all people. NAGPRA recognizes the cultural right of living Native Americans to speak on behalf of their ancestors and to determine proper treatment of ancestral remains. Such recognition is a basic human right, the exercise of which is long-standing attribute of Native sovereignty and self-determination. Therefore, we support the bill as it will facilitate the repatriation of Native American human remains and associated funerary objects by enabling state institutions to keep confidential records of traditional and cultural knowledge. Once again, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I respectfully ask for the full committee's endorsement of HB 6203. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa, for your testimony. Representative Palmer, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being with us. Do you fear the continued desecration of graves if it were to be public knowledge which objects and artifacts had been returned and where they came from. Is part of the concern here that the black market for relics would thrive because people would perhaps have knowledge and commit these crimes again?
Yeah, that's certainly part of the concern. We actually deal with, the destruction of our grave sites on a fairly regular basis. And so this is something that is still happening during this day and age. And currently the way that the state of Connecticut is going through the process makes it really hard for our elders or the tribal people to repatriate our remains, because if we don't have the protections in place that we're really used to, at least under the federal model, then it's unlikely that the process is really going to be followed. So it's certainly a concern and a fear, and just, to me, it's just a basic human right that everyone can to rest in peace. So, yeah.
And so is it your hope that the state would codify into state statute what NAGPRA does federally?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. See no further questions or comments. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that one today. Thank you for your advocacy. Up next, we have Representative Ann Hughes, then Deidre Murch. Representative Hughes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Flexer and distinguished members of the GAE committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify in strong support as a co-sponsor of HB 6211, an act concerning gender and racial diversity on boards and commissions and councils. And especially, I just wanted to also lift up modernizing this online system. And the reason I'm so excited about this bill is because those most impacted by the policies that these boards and commissions and the work of these groups should be on the boards and commissions that inform the work, because that is how we improve our policies. So when we look around and we see policy boards and commissions that are dominated, like was talked about, by one group or another, we aren't qualifying the lived experiences of the diversity of other people beyond that one group. And so to the question about qualifications, it's creating it's creating a lens to qualify maybe non-traditional experiences as important to informing the work. Again, those most impacted by the policies should be at the table informing and improving those policies and systems. And I just wanted to reframe systemic racism as power plus discrimination. And that power piece is so important, because if there's no power there, if there's no power involved, and that's where systems and policies come into play, then it's just discrimination, not systemic racism. So I just wanted to clear that up. And I also support SG 13, modernizing pre-registration and early voting, and again, modernizing Connecticut's voting system and removing barriers to increase enfranchisement so that all citizens can participate in the power structures and policies of our state and government. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Master. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. It's always nice to see you. I appreciate your testimony, although I know many times we don't agree on issues. I certainly value your comments. I just have two quick questions, really just a scenario going back to the qualifications for boards and commissions.
Sure.
If I had a scenario where I had, let's say, 3 people, they had the exact same qualifications, 1 male, white male, 1 female, and 1 somebody of an ethnic diversity. Which one would we pick? Which one are we advocating that we pick? The white male, a female, or somebody of color or ethnic background?
Well, like Representative, through you, Mr. Chair, like Representative Borer and some of my predecessors described, a lot of these boards and commissions are already dominated by one group. So what we're asking is that this board and commission say, how can we improve the policies and inform the work that that board is charged with by opening up space at the table for a different voice? So, you know, I would look at the context. Who's there already? Who's you know, lived experiences and viewpoints are already at the table. How can we make room for somebody who's not at the table? Every time I walk into a board or a commission or a body, I look and see who's there and who, more importantly, who's not there. So the question is, who's not here at the table, and then inform your decision. And just, it's not necessarily intentionally discrimination. People obviously, especially these volunteer boards, reach out to their own network, and their own networks are people that are very much in that same, you know, community, right? Or profession or whatever. So it's easy for boards and commissions to be dominated by the sameness, because it's harder to find and recruit people outside of your own network. And so that's what this bill attempts to do, is deliberately go outside of that traditional, your own network, see who's not at the table, bring them in to help inform the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that. Through you, Mr. Chair. So are you basically suggesting that they should not pick the white male, that they should pick somebody else?
It depends on who's not at the table and what that board is trying to do.
Can you just please go one at a time, please?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Chairman. So if 70% of the people on that board were, I'm just going to say white male, for example, are you suggesting that they don't pick another white male? That would be the suggestion based on the language of this bill. Would that be a correct analogy? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that, saying, okay, again, I don't know what the board is doing and what policies and systems the work is about, but I believe that the work can be better informed when you have a diversity of lived experiences and qualifications at the table. So you did ask a really good question about who determines what those qualifications are. And I think that's a good question, because that's where the power is, right? So you're saying, who has power to determine who's appropriate to be on this body? And this bill is trying to open that up a little bit and say, you know, think through that lens of maybe things that you weren't considering as qualifications. I mean, I was on a task force in 2019 for public transportation for seniors, people with disabilities, and what was the third one? It was the third thing, and veterans. So it's of course important to get people on that task force or commission that are part of those three those three communities. But it's important even if they're not about a public transportation, because you wouldn't even think about how people have access to public transportation unless you specifically opened up that board or commission to people with other experiences, not able-bodied, not mobile, right? So that's, even if it's not saying that's what this commission is about, it's really important to think through, like Representative Santiago said, some of those other communities that aren't at the table, because they're going to help make public transportation much better, for instance, or whatever the board's work is. And it depends on what that board work is, but I believe that yes, women at the table make pretty much every policy better, but that's just, that's just my feeling, that I do think that we bring a different perspective, and I know you do too.
Thank you, Representative. So my original question was, if they all had the exact same qualifications, and I know you had mentioned, well, it depends on what they bring to the table. My question was, they all identically have the exact same qualifications. They all have the same life experiences. In my mind, I don't look at somebody based on race or color, male or female, to make that decision. And what you're basically saying, if I understand you, correct me and tell me if I'm wrong, that exact same qualifications, that we should pick somebody different than what's the majority of that board or commission is made up because of their race or gender. Would that be a correct analogy through you, Mr. Chairman?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, I would reframe it that some of those qualifications are invisible. See, when you're saying that the exact same qualifications, regardless of those differences, that's where I propose that, for instance, if we talk about equity in the workplace and we talk about sexual harassment in the workplace, even if that's not what the board is about or whatever, if you don't have people at the table that can bring their perspective, that I experience this all the time. And if all the people there never experience it, they're not going to say that's an issue for our organization because they don't see it. It's invisible. So my question, my reframing it is that some of those qualifications are invisible to whatever the majority is. And that's why it's important to bring those different perspectives into the work that you're doing, because you're going to raise the profile of issues that you didn't even know were a problem.
Thank you for that. So based on your scenario, based on that, not everybody does have the same qualifications, which is why when people get appointed to a board or commission, if you're saying that they're invisible, we're saying that you're correct. Not everybody has the same qualifications. And when you pick somebody to be on a board or commission, you're basing it based on their qualifications. So you kind of just answered my question that yes, we don't all have the same qualifications, and that's why people are chosen based on their qualifications. Somebody may have more skill than another. Would you agree with that? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would posit to you that we are asking who is valuing what skills, and we are asking boards and commissions to value things that maybe they don't value as especially lived experiences as a qualification, and lived experiences as a parent, trying to arrange childcare, single parent. These all come to bear on almost all the work that we do, and yet we don't look through that lens to say, oh, somebody with that lived experience is qualified to help us with our work. So I'm elevating, I suppose, these differences of lived experiences as being valued qualifications. I guess that's what I'm reflecting back to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Just one more quick question. I'm just curious because I do sit on other committees with you, and you talk a lot about equity, right? Can you tell me in your mind, what is equity?
Okay, love that you asked that. Yay!
What is the meaning, the definition of equity in your mind? Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I love this because so many people have been denied from access to power and to basically opportunity. That equity means about bringing up that access and playing field. And that is why equity is important to consider when we are talking about populating boards and commissions, because these are people that have been systemically, again, systemically, not individually or deliberately, but systemically denied access to opportunity, to justice, to privilege, to benefits and to rights. So systemically denied access to rights mostly through policy and a lot of the way our institutions and our systems play out. So we have to create not just an equal, it's like equality would be giving everybody the same size pair of shoes, but equity would be giving somebody a pair of shoes that fits them. Does that make sense? So equality would be everybody gets the same, pair of Nike size 9 shoes. That's equality. Everybody gets the same thing. Equity would be getting a pair of shoes that fits, especially for those who have been denied shoes all along.
Thank you. So I guess, can you give me an example of how people are denied opportunity or access? I mean, I see in the state of Connecticut, we have a plethora of opportunity for everyone in this state. And every committee that I'm on, we are always offering education, housing. There's so many things that we offer that pretty much takes care of everybody in the state. So I guess I'm trying to figure out where somebody was denied opportunity. And if you have any data or any examples that you can share with me. Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I am mostly just like some of my colleagues, really heartbroken about the testimony we heard in Judiciary this morning around coercive control, and because that is denied as a reason for getting, for instance, a temporary restraining order, or basically any kind of support from the courts when domestic abuse victims go for help. It's really clear that embedded in our court system is denial of access to justice because it doesn't fit within this very prescribed view of what we consider domestic abuse. And that is systemic, and that is like through generations, and we've tried to change our laws, but they haven't gone far enough to really be framed in a evidence-based trauma and, basically a trauma-informed policy. So women, and it's not only women, but it's often, domestic abuse victims are traumatized by the court system, often by, police that don't believe them and don't see enough evidence and don't take them seriously. And it is just heartbreaking because so many ruined families could have been avoided if we created equity in our court system that really centered the reality of basically abuse and neglect. And I see it all the time. I see it all the time as a social worker, that our systems are really based around a viewpoint. And that's why it's so important to get different viewpoints to change our policies and systems to create equity.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think I could have this conversation with you for hours. I have a totally different perspective on it, but I won't drag this out in this committee. Perhaps offline we can certainly talk about it. But thank you, Representative, for your testimony, and Senator and Representative Fox. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Master-Francisco. Up next, Senator Sampson. Before Senator Sampson begins, I just want to ask the committee to try to keep the discussion focused on the bill at hand. I think I understand the general passion on the different sides of this legislation and other pieces before us. And I think sometimes we get a little far afield of the subject matter at hand. So I just ask all committee members to keep that in mind as we debate these bills and then move forward today. Thank you. Senator Sampson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Representative. I understand you're a co-sponsor of the legislation that's before us. I'm just curious, did you have any part in the drafting of this bill? Or did you just co-sponsor it after the fact? Or I don't know, are you just involved in this, in the process of making this legislation into what it is? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We talked about it in the Bipartisan Women's Caucus last year, and I think we talked about it even the year before. So, so we talked about it more as a concept, and again about being improving the way that we do business and the work that this government and the councils and the boards and commissions do to be more reflective and more representative of the Connecticut public. And I think by creating more room at the table for those who aren't here, we can do a better job, who aren't at the table, because this is a power structure. So creating space for those who have been disempowered informs better policy.
I thank you very much for that answer. I don't know if it was really what I was driving at, but I guess the reason why I was asking how involved you were in the actual drafting of the language and the policy that's before us is because, and you're not alone in this, because everybody I've talked to about the bill seems to do the same thing, which is they talk about things other than what the bill says. And I'll just, in your example, it's pretty straightforward, because you said that this bill is about invisible qualifications. And in fact, if the bill was about invisible qualifications, I would likely support it. I mean, can you give me an example of an invisible qualification, for example? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think I did before, especially around parents or single parents who are, juggling childcare and juggling, trying to do their jobs in the economy and so forth. So lack of support around that is not either, it depends on what the board or commission is, but, say almost everything has a lot to do with how can we support our families, right? How can we support keeping food on the table and a roof over our heads? So if we do not look at the way that our policies are undercutting people just trying to do exactly that, and we're not thinking through that, how is this going to, for instance, the school day, the way it lets out at 3 o'clock, a lot of working parents, both working parents, aren't back home to take care of their kids then. So like, if we don't really think through how this one policy is going to impact real families, then we're doing our work a disservice by not having those lived invisible qualifications. Like I say, you might not think, oh, this is around education. Let me make sure I have single parents at the board or commission represented, because they're going to bring into perspective how this is going to impact them, and trying to keep us all safe and trying to keep us all going. So that's an example that you wouldn't really think of that as a qualification to be on a board. But being a single parent is a very important lived qualification for informing the work that most boards and commissions need to do.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I think I understand what you're talking about. I mean, I can think of a number of examples, like if you were doing a board that had to do with like juvenile justice programs, you would want, people that had some interaction with the problem and or solutions, people that haven't been affected by crime in their backgrounds, or people that have been through other juvenile justice programs or rehabilitation, or had interactions with corrections. I completely understand that makes complete sense to involve people in the conversation that have direct interaction. You spoke with Representative Mastrofrancesco, and I don't know what board or commission would have to do with mechanics, but I think her point was well taken, is that somebody that works in that industry who has direct knowledge of what's going on is what's critical. So it sounds like we're in agreement. The problem I have, Representative, is that the bill is not about invisible qualifications. In fact, the bill is about the exact opposite of invisible qualifications. It is about visible qualifications in namely race and gender. And I just find it interesting that whenever I ask anyone who's a proponent of this bill, instead of telling me that they are actively trying to promote people based on race and gender at the expense of other people of different races and genders, they tell me about things like invisible qualifications. Now, I'm very much in favor of making sure we have the most qualified person, as I pointed out to you. And I can certainly recognize, as you know, Representative Farrar did a tremendous job, by the way, in pointing out that diversity lends itself to having people that have those invisible qualifications. And I can buy that all day long. And maybe that's what you're trying to say.
Right. Well, through you, Mr. Chair, the lens. It's not. I think you're focusing on the attribute, but we're asking for a broader lens, because the lens helps you include people that you wouldn't even think about. You know, the lens helps you include, you know, like I say, I walk into a setting and I notice if I'm the only woman there, and probably, and so that's just a lens to help you bring that whole bunch of invisible qualifications. I mean, there's a whole bunch of invisible qualifications, not just because of my gender, but because I'm also a social worker, because I'm also, you know, an artist, I'm also a writer, whatever. So I'm bringing all these lenses too, and you're not really asking for that in terms of trying to populate your board or commission, but we're opening up that lens to create those it's sort of a structure, it's a construct to create a way of including more people at the table to make policy that's going to impact more of those people. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, except I mean, I want to just make one minor correction, is that you said I was focusing on attributes or something like I'm focused on only one thing, and that is the policy language that's in this bill.
Okay.
And you and I, it sounds like we have a similar goal, which is that we want to make sure that we have the best people that have the best life experience, which is a term you used, for whatever position. And I agree with you there. And I'm in favor of a bill that takes that into consideration. So if we had a bill before us that said, appointments for boards and commissions must take into consideration life experience, even if it said invisible qualifications that are not just simply what school you graduated from, or the fact that, like you said, single mothers might have something to say about an education program. I'm with you on all of that. I just want to challenge you that that's not what the bill says. The bill very simplistically decides that people are nothing more than their race and gender. And I find it offensive to my core. And so should anyone else who finds racism offensive to their core, like I do, because people are much more than race and gender. People are individuals and they should be treated as such. I really think that, the political parties and the debate on equity has taken us off the path of understanding one another in a way that I find so hard to deal with, through you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, the reason why I'm engaging you in this conversation and some of your colleagues is because I'm not trying to challenge you on your desire to make the world a better place. I want you to see that some of us that you look at through a lens that we don't see the things you do. I want you to understand that we see it too. But I don't see the solution as equity, which I gathered from your definition is essentially trying to make up for past wrongs. Can I just ask you a question? And again, this is a friendly conversation directly related to the bill, Mr. Chairman, because I believe that
he
this
might
bill.
cut you off, Senator.
Yes, I know. I see Representative Fox eyeing me over there. The bill has to do with trying to appoint more folks of race and gender diversity to boards and commissions. And I suspect the reason for that is because of a desire for what you might call equity, or as a response to what some people term as systemic racism. Would that be an accurate statement, Representative? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, the systemic racism, again, is not around intentional necessarily exclusion. It's just, again, we have to look at power plus discrimination, right? And so that's why the boards and commissions represent a policy power dynamic. So equity is about considering creating an access path that just has been by default denied. And that default is not vilifying anybody who was recruited for those, positions. Like I said, you go and recruit with within the network that you have and within the network that you know. And this is asking you to deliberately go outside that network and outside that community that you know, and it's a lens that maybe is too simplistic. I would grant you that. Maybe it's too simplistic, but it's a start. It's a good step.
Thank you, Representative. It's so funny. Every time you say something, I have 40 other things I want to talk to you about. So I'm trying to stay focused. Yeah, I was talking about systemic racism. First off, I want to just say, regarding positions of power, I don't consider being a state senator or a state representative a position of power. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite. We have thousands and thousands of bosses telling us what to do. And that's the way I view the job. It often concerns me when I hear my colleagues use the term govern or rule. I'm like, wait 1 minute, that's not how our system works. We have a representative form of government, and we're supposed to respond to our constituents.
And serve them.
Yep, understood, of course. So when it comes to like systemic racism, which you just acknowledge is kind of the point of why we're doing policies like these. So can you, my opinion, just off the top, is that we've already done our best to eliminate systemic racism in America by fixing the wrongs of the past. Now, I mean, I understand that we can't fix society, but we fixed the laws. Like, for instance, there are no prohibitions on people of different ethnic backgrounds or different genders from voting or owning property, et cetera, et cetera. We've already done what we need to do to correct those. Can you give me an example of a systemic racist law? I mean, where we actually have something in law that prohibits a race or gender from the same access. Because to me, that's what systemic racism is, and we've solved that problem. So the problem that exists with racism and lack of diversity in our culture is not a result of the laws; it's a result of the culture. So,
well, you're through you, Mr. Chair, you are describing cultural policy and systems of racism, which again, there's a lot of residual like after effect, like when Secretary of State says all of these commissions are only, this made up of even women when we made up of 52% of the population. That's kind of a residual sort of leftover that we haven't done a good job of modernizing, basically, to who the population is that we are representing. So, the laws aren't necessarily explicit, but if you look at the difference between mandatory minimums around, crack cocaine versus not opioids, but yeah, okay, opioids. We have unequal impact of our laws and our criminal justice system because of how we criminalize the use of certain substances over other substances. So that's an example, for instance, of systemic racism, just how it's characterized within our justice system and not equitably enforced. And it's not necessarily, it's just a leftover. We haven't updated them. We haven't modernized. We haven't looked at substance use we've criminalized substance use in some communities and not in others. So that's an example.
And thank you, Representative. You're going to get me in a lot of trouble with the chairman here. I really only have a few questions, but you're giving me very long answers, and I know he's getting anxious.
Okay.
I have no desire to cut you off. I really wanted to get through my questions and get to a point. But again, you have a lot to say, and I certainly respect and admire your desire to get your point across. So I guess I'm close to the end. I don't disagree with you that there are artifacts in our laws that may appear to have that, but there are no actual laws that are systemically racist. It's because one type of drug it has a stiffer penalty than another, and that tends to affect certain populations differently, is certainly a concern. And you can look at that, and it's something that I agree needs to be addressed. But the fact that it's systemically racist, I don't know, because it doesn't say we're trying to get at this population. It's just that crime has this penalty.
Well, when you look at power, again, power plus discrimination. So how is the power, for instance, of the criminal justice system and the mandatory minimums and applied or enforced or arrested or incarcerated? That's a lot of power, because you're obviously depriving people of your rights versus somebody being referred to treatment. So there's unequal power in how those laws are implemented, and implementation and impact is incredibly important. So systemic racism is about the impact, not the intent.
Understood. So
Can I just interject quickly here, Senator and Representative? And I'm always reluctant to cut debate off or that conversation. I just think we're getting into a much more philosophical debate here, and I'd like to kind of bring our focus back to the underlying bill if we can, to kind of narrow our focus on the bill at hand.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yes, by all means. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I will just ask one question, hopefully without a follow-up, depending on the response I get, which is, Representative, through you, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned a bunch of different bills that you consider to have a systemic racism result. Would you, or an impact? Would you consider a law being passed that that actually truly benefits one population over another, as by specifying that in bill language as something that would be systemically racist? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Say it again. I'm a little confused.
I'm asking if a bill that says that we're going to focus on giving Caucasian Americans more access to jobs in corrections, would you say that that is a systemically racist bill? Bill?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if it doesn't have the historical impact of power behind it, and again, we have to look at power and discrimination, not just discrimination alone, because that sounds like discriminatory, right? What you just described is discriminatory. But we have to look at the long arc of power and how it's been applied and the impact. So I wouldn't describe that as systemically racist because it doesn't have the long arc of power behind it.
Well, thank you very much for your answers, Representative. I just, in closing our conversation, I'll just say that, I appreciate your view very much, and I do honestly believe we're trying to get to the same place. But I will reiterate my point that the bill, to me, is systemically racist. Systemic racism to me is putting something in the law that says you're going to benefit one race or not racism but gender more than another, and that's what this bill does on its face. If we could redraft a bill that does what you and your colleagues who came in support of this bill suggested, which is to encourage the inclusion of invisible qualifications, as you mentioned, and life experience as part of the selection process for boards and commissions, you'd have my wholehearted and undying support for it. But a bill that specifically says right in its title and its verbiage that it is going to look at the universe the state of Connecticut and the people in it as nothing more than what color and sex they are, I find it offensive, and we should not be writing laws like that. And you can disagree with me if you like, but I hope you'll weigh that going forward, that I really do want what you want. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator, and thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Thomas, hand is raised. The floor is yours, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As much as I enjoy a far-ranging conversation on race and systemic racism, I, out of respect for members of the public, I want to move this along very quickly. I just had one question that I heard quite some time ago, so I forget the exact quote, but it seemed to imply that qualifications needed to serve on boards and commissions were somehow changing in this bill. So I just wanted to make it clear that many of our boards and commissions are mandated, those qualifications, by state statute, federal statute, and other parameters. So you can just say yes or no. Is that your understanding? And everything else you said was just your personal opinion?
That, through you, Mr. Chair, that is my understanding. And I'm framing everything else as a lens. And that's where my, respectfully, Senator Sampson and I perceive that differently. But I'm going to hold them to the creating another bill with the language that.
Perfect. Let's get a working group together.
Let's get a working group. I'm all over that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very anxious to get to number 9.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Thank you, Representative Hughes. Seeing no further question or comments, appreciate your advocacy and testimony today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Up next, Deidre Murch, followed by Sarah Sportman. Deidre, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Sorry we skipped over you earlier. I think you stepped away, but the
No,
floor is
that's
yours. Please continue.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deidre Murch, and I'm a vice president at 1199. I lead the home care division of our union. We represent about 10,000 PCAs who are employed by home and community-based waivers. In Connecticut, these waivers allow consumers to stay in their home and live independently and employ a caregiver of their choice. The need for these services has just about doubled in the past 8 years, and the program is administered by DSS with 2 fiscal intermediaries managing the payroll system. In the decade I've spent organizing home care providers, I have yet to receive a single complaint about one of the fiscal intermediaries, Sunset Shores. But we've received thousands about Allied Community Resources. There is not a week that goes by where we do not hear from someone in crisis who did not get paid. In 2018, Allied got $6.1 million in revenue from the state of Connecticut to process this payroll. But in the same 12-month period, they processed 6,000 timesheets late. I think you'll hear from members of DSS or members of the Workforce Council who will tell you that 98 or 99% of timesheets are processed on time. But the problem is not that PCAs never receive the money, it's that a delay of 7 or 14 or 21 days really wreaks havoc in the lives of working families. If a PCA doesn't get paid on payday, they're almost guaranteed to wait at least a week for the error to be fixed. And please don't let that 99% figure fool you. Again, even processing 1% of timesheets late is 6,000 unique instances where a PCA wakes up Friday and has an empty bank account. One thing that's important for everyone to understand is that PCAs don't just work paycheck to paycheck. They actually work a paycheck or two behind. 90% are women, 65% are Black and Brown caregivers. And as the payroll agent for all DSS programs, Allied's payroll is disproportionately made up of Black and Brown caregivers compared with Sunset Shores, which is comparatively whiter and higher wage. The vast majority of PCAs make $16.25 per hour. Those who are lucky enough to get full-time hours still bring home less than $30,000 a year, but no longer qualify for Husky. About 18% of our PCAs are uninsured entirely. Many can't secure full-time hours and bring home a lot less than that, and close to 40% work multiple jobs. The stories we hear just really haunt me, and you will hear some of these haunting stories today in the testimony. And I hope that you will remember those stories because they really illustrate the human toll that paying a very low wage workforce has. And, you know, DSS will also tell you that Allied is subject to a performance improvement plan and that things are improving, but our data shows that things are pretty much as bad as they were a year ago or 2 years ago. And in some ways have gotten worse during the pandemic. In the last 6 months of 2020, DSS's own reporting showed that Allied processed over 4,000 timesheets after the scheduled payday. And half of those were actually processed late during 1 week in December, close to the holiday. And in a recent survey of our own members, 70% say they've had at least one problem with Allied in the past 6 months. And about 15% said they've had
Your
6
3
or
minutes
more.
is now over.
Thank you. No human being, much less a working person who helps their consumer live a life of dignity and independence, should have to find themselves in crisis because they didn't get paid for hours worked. Please put this payroll nightmare to an end and pass Senate Bill 1075. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. March, for your testimony. Questions or comments? Ms. March, are you a PCA?
No,
No. Okay. How many members do you say are in your organization?
there are 10,000 PCAs represented by our union.
Really? Fantastic. Okay. Thank you for your time and testimony. I appreciate your advocacy. Thank you for being here. Thank you, ma'am. Up next, Sarah Sportman. Sarah, quick question. I have following you, Jacqueline Vinegar, Robert, and Glenn Matoma. Are they testifying with you or separately?
Separately.
Okay, great. The floor is yours. Please continue.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Sportman and I'm Connecticut State Archaeologist. In that capacity, I oversee the care and study of the state's archaeological collections within the State Museum of Natural History at UConn. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of House Bill 6203. We're here today to request a FOIA exemption for specific types of confidential information provided to UConn by Native American tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and lineal descendants during the consultation process conducted in accordance with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. Please know that UConn worked with the Connecticut FOIA Commission on the language of the bill, and we believe the commission does not oppose the exemption we seek. Native American history in Connecticut extends back more than 12,000 years. Before Europeans arrived in the 17th century, Native people lived in every part of the state. European diseases decimated Native populations, and the colonial desire for land and resources led to brutal wars and dispossession. Native people were sold into slavery and indentured servitude and marginalized in colonial society. Then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, Native Americans and their ancestors came to be viewed as specimens for scientific research, and human remains and sacred objects were looted from burial grounds and sacred sites on behalf of museums and collectors. Native people persisted through all of this, maintaining their communities and cultural traditions. Today, many of their ancestors and sacred cultural materials are held in museum and university collections, including at UConn. In 1990, NAGPRA was enacted into federal law to address these past human rights violations and give tribes the ability to make decisions regarding their ancestors and sacred objects. NAGPRA requires that federally funded institutions consult with Native American tribes to repatriate human remains and sacred objects in their collections. For instance, the collections at UConn include the remains of at least 96 ancestors and over 10,000 NAGPRA reportable cultural objects from Connecticut as well as out of state. The repatriation process under NAGPRA requires tribes to submit evidence supporting their claims of cultural affiliation to ancestors and belongings they wish to have returned. This evidence often includes sensitive cultural, religious, and personal data, such as the location of sacred sites, details of religious ceremonies, and tribal membership rosters. This information is provided to the holding institution in confidence as part of the NAGPRA process, and its release can have grave consequences, including potentially violating the sanctity of sacred sites and objects, compromising their security as sovereign nations, jeopardizing their legal claims to territory and ancestors, and opening members up to discrimination. For example, to make public the location of a sacred site may mean the site is no longer sacred and may expose the location to looters. To make public the nature of a sacred item can negate the spirituality not just of that item, but also all other items similar in use. We're requesting the FOIA exemption to protect the identity of ancestors, the sacredness of cultural belongings, and the sanctity of Native American religion and rituals during the NAGPRA process. Thank you for your consideration of this important matter, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for testifying today, Ms. Foreman. Just quickly, can you, has your agency had any experience with NAGPRA before? Any interactions?
Yes, we've been working on the NAGPRA process for several years. And 3 years ago, UConn hired a NAGPRA coordinator to help facilitate the process.
And approximately, I found your testimony fascinating to just to hear it. Approximately, how many items do you think is in the collection that could be potentially protected through this process? Is there a way to identify?
We have about we have the remains of at least 96 individuals. So there'll be human remains, and there are thousands of cultural items, probably 10,000 or more, that would fall under NAGPRA.
Really? And they're all currently in your possession, or you?
Yes, they're all currently housed at the University of Connecticut, and they form just a part of the larger archaeological collections, which include over 500,000 objects.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate you being here today. Appreciate your advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, Jacqueline Benninger Rowe Robert, followed by Glenn Matoma. Good afternoon, Jacqueline. How are you?
Hello. Good afternoon, honored members of the GAE committee. My name is Jacqueline Benninger Robert, and I am the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA coordinator at the University of Connecticut. In this capacity, I consult with and facilitate the respectful return of ancestors and cultural belongings in Connecticut and across the country to 574 federally recognized sovereign tribal nations. I'm here today to respectfully request your consideration of HB 6203, an act exempting certain records of Native American cultural knowledge from public disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act, and to provide context about NAGPRA and the regulatory process of determining cultural affiliation as it pertains to this bill. NAGPRA has often been heralded as the most significant piece of human rights legislation ever enacted. Since its inception in 1990, over 190,000 people and 2.5 million cultural belongings, included sacred religious items, have been identified for repatriation under NAGPRA. This number grows every year and will continue to do so, reflective of the scale of the grave robbing and cultural appropriation that took place during the last 2 centuries. NAGPRA is a complex and lengthy process. A single NAGPRA case can take years and sometimes even decades to bring to completion, putting a strain on the resources of tribes and institutions alike. For state institutions and agencies such as the University of Connecticut, a challenge to NAGPRA implementation and compliance is the potential for disclosure of confidential information pursuant to Connecticut's FOIA. Much of the information that is gathered during the NAGPRA consultation is referred to our counterparts in Washington, D.C. and published in the Federal Register, making it publicly available. However, what is reportable at the federal level versus what is received as evidence are very different matters. Although the types of evidence submitted are reported, the details of those avenues of evidence are not reportable under the NAGPRA regulatory process. It is the latter information that we are seeking to exempt from disclosure. NAGPRA's regulatory procedure is centered on determining cultural affiliation, a process that places the burden of proof on the tribes and the burden of determination on the institutions such as UConn. Repatriation cannot proceed without a determination of cultural affiliation. It is important to point out that the NAGPRA process is a government-to-government transaction, which is facilitated by UConn on the behalf of the state. We are supportive of transparency where appropriate, but it is inappropriate to make the confidential cultural knowledge records we are requesting to be exempt part of the public record. Ultimately, NAGPRA's purpose is restorative, giving tribal nations the ability to make decisions regarding the management of their belongings, culture, and beliefs. These people and their belongings were disinterred, displayed, and studied under antiquated processes that are illegal today. In order to prove cultural affiliation so that ancestors and belongings can be returned, tribes must divulge confidential information and make that, if made public, compromises their identity, their religion, and their culture. By requesting this exemption, we seek to protect the identity of ancestors, the sacredness of cultural belongings, and the sanctity of Native American religion and rituals. As such, HB 6203 is so much more than a disclosure exemption. It is a vehicle for human rights and freedom of religion. I sincerely thank you for your consideration of this important legislation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for testimony today, ma'am. Quick question, do you have any experience with what or knowledge of what other states do in these situations?
I have a little knowledge of that. I know that California and Indiana are also considering similar pieces of legislation, and that depending on the FOIA of different states, there is different interpretations for what is considered disclosed or not disclosed.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate your advocacy. Look forward to working with you in the days ahead. Thank you for being here. Up next, Glenn Matoma, followed by Jason Mancini, followed by Luther Weeks. Glenn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Fox and distinguished members. I'm Glenn Matoma. I'm an assistant professor of human rights and education and director of DOD Human Rights Impact at UConn. I also serve on our advisory committee for compliance with NAGPRA. I strongly support HB 6203 as an essential protection of the rights and traditional knowledge of Native American communities. In my roles at UConn, I have worked to develop our academic programs in Native American and Indigenous studies. I've supported increased services and cultural supports for our Native American and Indigenous students. And I've worked to develop reciprocal, responsible, and respectful partnerships with Native communities in Connecticut and beyond. For instance, I was part of the recent efforts led by our Office for Diversity and Inclusion to develop and encourage the use of the university's land acknowledgement statement, which recognizes the historic and ongoing presence of Native communities in and around the lands that UConn currently is sited on. So the Native American Graves Repatriation Act is an essential tool for righting an historic wrong that institutions like UConn help to perpetrate on Native Americans over generations. In pursuit of the laudable goal of scientific knowledge, many academics nonetheless trampled on the rights of Indigenous peoples, treating them and their cultures as objects to be studied, not peoples to be respected. NAGPRA helps to rebalance that relationship by facilitating the return of stolen remains and items, and also opening respectful dialogue between academic and cultural institutions and tribal communities. Freedom of information is also, frankly, an important mechanism for ensuring democratic transparency and accountability with respect to public institutions. And certainly as a human rights scholar, I am not interested in weakening the application of FOIA in ways that would detract from that transparency and accountability. But as with all legislative tools, we have to attend to the unintended consequences of those instruments, especially when they place a disproportionate burden on historically marginalized communities. In this instance, FOIA works against the human rights protections of NAGPRA by exposing the traditional knowledge of cooperating tribal communities to the risks of compromising the location of sacred sites, disclosing closely held ceremonial practices, or making public other information that could harm their efforts to reclaim lands unlawfully taken from them. We do not want our tribal partners to be forced to choose between bringing home the sacred remains of their ancestors and protecting that home and traditional knowledge for their children. So I urge you to support HB 6203 and to help UConn be a better partner to our Native and Indigenous neighbors. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Glenn, for your testimony. I apologize if one of the prior witnesses had indicated. Can you give me, how old is NAGPRA, the act?
1990, it was adopted.
1990. And, okay. And how long, are you familiar with the underlying NAGPRA Act by any chance?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Are you familiar with NAGPRA, probably, I'm curious, just the act itself, how long did it take to get passed? Was it going on for a while? Was it a year-long process?
You know, honestly, I don't know the legislative history of the act, but it was certainly like many efforts to enshrine protections for Native communities, a long time in coming. Right, there has been a long-term effort, not just within the United States, but globally, on the repatriation of cultural artifacts that has spanned many generations, frankly.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Before we begin with number 13, Jason Mancini, and Ann Manuski was number 12. I don't think she's ever going to give her the opportunity if she is here to provide. Ann Manuski. Not present at the moment. Jason Mancini, followed by Luther Weeks. Jason.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to provide comments on HB 6203. My name is Jason Mancini, and since 2018, I have served as the Executive Director of the Connecticut Humanities Council. I'm also co-founder of Agamout Educational Initiative, a majority-owned Native American consulting group. Prior to that, for more than 30 years, I conducted archaeological research on the Mashantucket Pequot Reservation and in Pequot homelands. I coordinated NAGPRA-related research as staff archaeologist and senior researcher at the Pequot Museum, and I facilitated the repatriation of human remains and funerary objects as the executive director of the Pequot Museum. At the request of the Mashantucket Pequot tribe, I participated in the excavation, study, and reburial of Pequot ancestors disturbed from their resting places by the blade of a bulldozer or the bucket of a backhoe. I've also closely examined historical records and have learned from oral histories the destruction wrought by looters. One cemetery in particular had over 500 looted burials. Human remains and funerary objects from this and many other cemeteries were found at museums and universities all over the Northeast and beyond. As a center of education, Connecticut was and now is home to many institutions that participated in the 19th century skull science of phrenology, with scholars often trading human remains with their colleagues from across the nation and the world to enhance their personal collections. Later generations of avocational and professional archaeologists continued to loot native spaces to develop their personal collections, many of which ended up in the same museum and university collections. There are 574 federally acknowledged tribes, as well as state-recognized and unacknowledged tribes in the United States. Through various pathways, their ancestors and their stories are here in Connecticut too. Tracking and recovering human remains and funerary objects revives a painful history of dispossession and marginalization for these tribes. White people can hardly imagine what that feels like, but try for a moment to empathize. What if this happened to your grandparents, your ancestors? Tribes are sovereign nations, and we owe them the respect and dignity to manage their affairs in their own ways. Our systems of recompense are inadequate to undo the damage already done. There need not be public oversight of private matters. The brief history I've recounted is a stain on our society and our institutions. If I've been unclear, I testify in support of HB 6203. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jason, for your testimony. If I could just ask one simple question, probably a softball, maybe a silly question in retrospect, as I think about it, seeing that you're here and based on your testimony. If this bill were not to pass, do you see the process being abused in reality by individuals trying to get this information?
This has been deeply abused in the past. There have been cemeteries that have actively been looted or aware of and destroyed. There's an active trade in this type of material. Periodically in the news, you'll see this very type of looting going on. Yeah, there's a deep concern, and I believe that tribes have the right to keep this information private and out of the line of sight of any potential people who have ill will.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your testimony and advocacy. Thank you for being with us.
Welcome.
Up next, Luther Weeks, followed by Donald James, followed by Jason Chang. Mr. Weeks.
Chairs and members of the committee, my name is Luther Weeks, Executive Director of CT Voters Count, a computer scientist. I have extensive experience with risk limiting audits. I support Section 10 of HB 6325 with suggested changes. I applaud the Secretary of the State for bringing this concept forward, her office and UConn for the development of the UConn Audit Station. I support RLAs as an important tool, yet RLAs are not a panacea. RLAs are one of the many types of audits that can contribute to justified confidence in elections. Some RLAs and prototypes have been done well and others not so well. In the hearing on HB 6575, a ranking member, Mastro Francesco, asked an interesting question, which I would like to address. That is to explain RLAs as you would to fourth graders. That's a good question. Risk limiting audits are intended to confirm that elections are correctly counted and totaled or to correct incorrect results. Over a 10-year period, Connecticut has about 20,000 election contests. For instance, if 20 of those contests were incorrectly decided due to error or fraud, rigorous risk limiting audits, which examine all 20,000 contests, would correct at least 19 of the 20 that were incorrectly decided. My summary recommendations: consider doing what Colorado, Virginia, Rhode Island, and perhaps every other state that has prototyped or implemented RLAs have done. Convene a team of election officials and volunteer national experts to help plan a prototype. Bring tested software to the table to provide tested statistical calculations and public verifiability, and then report on the results and recommend methods and changes necessary in the law. Such a group could report to the task force, such as the RLA Rhode Island group reported to the Rhode Island Board of Elections. Do not limit the prototype to 5 to 10 largely redundant municipal RLAs. Move the prototype to the first half of 2022. That will give sufficient time to plan the prototypes. It will provide more access to statistical experts and those with experience with RLAs to participate. Move the reporting deadline to January 2023 to provide more time to absorb the lessons of the prototype, to consider all the issues necessary to implement actual RLAs, and to detail the changes necessary in the law. See my detailed testimony for reasoning behind these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks. So I have one question for you. In terms of, you referenced software for RLAs. In terms of software available, is there a significant amount of software available? Or is there a leading company? Is there one? Is there two?
There are, I believe, 3 different organizations that provide RLA software for free. You had one offer on the other bill from the OSIF Foundation, Mark Linderman, who also I see provided testimony today, apparently largely in agreement with my testimony, is paid by the Verified Voting Foundation, and he provided the software in Virginia and the software in Rhode Island. There are a couple other groups that provide such software. It's not stuff I would say that you can take off the shelf and use. You really need, one of the people that built it to customize it for your state or any special things that have to do with your audit. But the good thing about those softwares, not only they have tested statistical calculations, but they provide the ability to do this in public, where you have videos where data can be put in and seen publicly, and they report all the data back to the public. So anything that's done can be verified by hand to anybody in the public that wants to do that kind of thing.
And you were involved in the Rhode Island process, correct?
That's correct.
And when was that again? Fresh memory?
Well, that was held in January of 2019. It was held. And I'll just say that one person, the head of Common Cause in Rhode Island, really generated this after election was incorrectly decided in Rhode Island. And they said, gee, we don't want that to happen again. And so they passed legislation, something like this, authorizing audits. And he, had contacted me earlier, and we got a whole bunch of people involved. And, we had conference calls for 6 months planning it, and a whole bunch of people, probably 20 experts and, 40 people from Rhode Island were there for this event. And there were 40 members of the public there observing it. And we held it over 4 days. And then we spent, maybe you could do it faster, but we spent about 6 months creating recommendations to the Rhode Island Board of Elections. And in fact, that report shows a lot of answers that would not have to be repeated in Connecticut. There's other things we have to research and might want to try in Connecticut to determine how we could do it here, because unfortunately we're not as well organized in terms of our election management. They're all centralized, and they have a different kind of scanners than we have. But we have this great thing, the Yukon Audit Station, that could, they didn't take our recommendations, they took our second choice because it's too much to buy the equipment they would have needed from their election vendor. Unfortunately, we have the UCount audit station, which would make this really cost effective to do it in the way that's the most stable cost and the most effective way to do these audits. So I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it done well in Connecticut, which I think should be a little different than this audit this bill specifies right now, and especially more time.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate you being here. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Up next, Donald James, followed by Jason Chang, followed by Anthony Ligon. Mr. James.
Good afternoon. One more bit on the sheet. Hold on. Where in my lost my notes? Right. Right. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Donald James. I live in Glastonbury. I am on the one moment. Oh.
Hi, we can.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. We hear you now.
Right.
Just wanted to let you know I could hear you. I'm listening now, though. It's a little bit behind.
I'm on the elderly PCA waiver, which makes me able to hire, manage, and discharge my employees by myself. I employed 3 women to help with daily activities that I could do for myself if I did not have a disability. I've been on the waiver program for only 1 year, and we had at least 6 documented weeks where my PCAs did not get paid on time. Every Saturday, I submit my time sheets. I fill them out using Adobe Acrobat, and then I email them straight to Outline. I do it all 3 of them at the same time. Couple times, only 1 aide did not get paid for the week. The other 2 got paid. 1 aide did not get paid for 3 weeks. They keep on claiming they did not get their time sheet in order to pay them. Although I email the time sheet on time, sometimes Outline claim not to receive them. That means my PC may not get paid on Friday. This has put to drain on my PCA as well as me. I try to have a stress-free environment for my employees, and I know living from paycheck to paycheck is hard enough without missing several of them in a row. Shoot. I would like you to consider passing harder rules that would force allies to pay our PCAs on time without any hassle. Thank you.
Mr. James, thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate you being here, appreciate your advocacy, and look forward to working with you to get this, just to work with this bill as process continues. Thank you for being here today. Really, really appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Up next, Jason Chang, followed by Anthony Ligon, followed by Lynn Zimmer. Jason Chang, present.
Yes, I'm here.
Please begin.
Great, thank you. Chairman Fox, distinguished members. My name is Jason Chang. I'm a resident of West Hartford. I'm associate professor at UConn, and I direct the Asian American Studies Institute. I'm also a member of the Board of Education at West Hartford. I'm here to comment and support HB 6211. When I saw this bill, I immediately reflected on the value I've felt in my participation in committees at the University of Connecticut and serving the public schools of West Hartford. And boards, commissions, committees, and other appointed positions are vital to carrying out business of governance and providing crucial oversight over nearly every area of government. This bill is important from an equity standpoint, but it's also needed reform for efficacy in governance and democracy. I know from running faculty searches at UConn that the best way to get the most excellent candidates for a job is to have as diverse a pool as possible. And diverse teams are also more creative, better at solving problems of outcome disparity, and are attentive to different definitions of problems and able to arrive at multiple right answers. Diversity is both equitable and effective. Equitable involvement is also important because if we're able to address the structural dimensions of racism and inequality, we were going to need broader participation from underrepresented communities to meet the needs of governing in the 21st century. In February 2020, I believe it was the State Department report on boards and commissions found that Asian Americans made up 4.9% of the state's population, but represent 1.7% of the appointed positions. And there were other similar disparities with other groups in the state. But the sample size of the study was had 67% of boards and commissions represented. So given the weight of the sample size, I would wager that there would be stronger disparities across all groups in that study. I think shows the value of the intended 2-year cycle of reporting on the composition and pool demographics of the pool. Problems which government seeks to solve requires the inclusion of marginalized and underrepresented groups to reach those with other perspectives and knowledge of marginalized and underrepresented experiences. And so main reasons why I support this bill. And also want to support the creation of an easily accessible online application system. Reduces the barrier of entry for people to be considered for appointed positions. And I want to add another note to that. It's important to build kind of forward-thinking model.
3 minutes is now over.
Just three more sentences.
Of course.
Forward-thinking model of demographic inputs that anticipates the kind of reports that will be analytically useful for program evaluation. So in other words, the form needs to keep in mind the kinds of analysis that will be possible on the afterwards. So in particular, I'm interested in gender diversity and the need to extend beyond the male-female binary. My child identifies as non-binary, and I want them and people that share their gender to be recognized as a whole person and fully able to serve the public. For this reason, I also support House Bill 5654 to include non-binary gender in government forms. Thanks, and can answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason, for your testimony. I do appreciate the fact that I think the prior discussion we had on this bill, the portion that got lost, I think, was the part that you acknowledged about the online portal, which is a very important component of the legislation as well. I think that kind of got lost in the earlier discussion. I thank you for bringing that up and emphasizing the importance of that and how practically that could have an impact on a lot of people's lives. I thank you for doing that. Seeing no question or comments, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your advocacy. Thank you, sir. Next up, Anthony Ligon, followed by Lynn Zimmer, followed by Linda Sinkowitz.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Dan Fox, and the members of this committee for allowing me to speak. I apologize for my background. I am currently leaving work and heading to my next job. My name is Anthony Pina Ligon. I am a constituent out of New Haven, Connecticut, and I am a caregiver. I've been a caregiver pretty much all my life. The job duties of a caregiver, Deidre Murch pretty much explained. We go into the people's homes. We pretty much save the state thousands of dollars every day, every month, by allowing people who have acquired brain injuries to stay in their homes instead of going to nursing homes. So my job consists of going into the home. I pretty much do the duties of a nurse without being qualified as being a nurse. I help assist with bandages, wounds. I've done transfers. I've done Hoyer lifts. I do cleaning. I do cooking. I do administering meds and so forth. I currently have 3 individuals, 2 who are under Allied Community Resources and 1 that is under Sunset Shores Fiscal Intermediary. Sorry, and I have no problems with Sunset Shores. I get paid on time. I get paid on Thursdays, every Thursday. Once my timesheet is in, I can submit it on Monday, I can submit it on Tuesday, and I'm still going to be paid within a timely manner. With Allied Community Resources, they have been constantly messing up my timesheet. I submitted a written thing, but I'm just going to speak from the heart. I've been on this payroll since I was about 21 years old, and I've been having problems. As a Black male in this community, you know, it's already a lot of things against me. I'm already trying to do things the right way. I'm also a gay male. So there's all types of stipulations against me. And with Allied not paying us on time every Friday, and before it was every other Friday, it really holds me back. Like, I'm trying to start off my life. I've been trying to be in college. I've been in and out of college since I was out of high school, trying to pay for it on my own because my parents both worked for the state, so I don't qualify for any financial aid or anything like that. So I'm also without health insurance. I've been without health insurance for a whole year now because my parents, like I said, worked for the state, so I was on their health insurance till 27. That's up. But because I have 3 individuals I take care of, I'm over the tax bracket where I can't get all this other health care that the state provides for people who are low income. I don't qualify for that. I need a root canal right now, and I don't have health insurance, which means I don't have dental insurance. So I was only able to pay for a partial of the problem, but that still didn't resolve the issue. I still need further assistance. So I'm asking you guys, can you please support Senate Bill 1075 because people like me are out here struggling. I know everyone in the world is pretty much struggling, especially due to the pandemic crisis, the aftermath that we're all going through. But people like me are specifically struggling. Deidre Merch mentioned that we have 10,000 members on this program, and imagine 10,000 people not getting paid on time. I'm going to call the question, how would you feel if you were living paycheck to paycheck and one Friday you don't get paid and you need to pay a bill? I recently just didn't get paid this past Friday, and I had to pay my car insurance, which is
Your 3 minutes is now over.
I'm going to close by saying I had to pay my car insurance, which is $611.06. So I didn't get paid on Friday by Ally. So I literally had to rob Peter to pay Paul. I had to borrow from different people. I had to, just do what I had to do to make sure the bill was paid on time. So I'm asking you guys, can you please support this bill for people like me and other people who are going to be coming on this program, and also the consumers that we take care of, because it's not fair to them that we're struggling when we're trying to provide a healthcare service to them. Thank you so much. And I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Anthony. Just briefly, how do you submit your timesheets to Ally, out of curiosity? How does that process work?
Right now, they say that they have all these forms of payments. You can do PDF format. They have a few different fax numbers that you can fax to. But even with them implementing that system over the last, I think, 2 years, it still hasn't been efficient. I know a woman who sends her timesheets over every way that they have available for you, the five different ways, and they still process her timesheets late. I've done it 5 different ways, and they've called me and asked me not to process my timesheets multiple times, just to do it once. But I'm like, I do it once, and you guys are claiming you don't get it or you don't get this. I have an example. I got hired. I was supposed to get hired with this lady. Well, one of the ladies I currently work for, someone quit on her due to the neighborhood she lived in, and I stepped in to help, and Ally supposedly didn't get my application for over a month. I had to call her case manager to do an emergency hire. She did the emergency hire. I sent the information over again. They claimed that they didn't get my timesheet that I submitted. Then they paid me, and I was going to submit my timesheet. So I called to figure out what was the problem. They said they don't have my bank account information. This was in October. I've been sending them my bank account information to get direct deposit since October, and they claim they still don't have it. Now I have a credit union. I've been trying to send them that information so I can have all my pay directly deposit into my credit union so I can make certain financial goals that I'm trying to do right now, like open up a business. And they supposedly don't have that information. So something is really going on up there. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know if it's the staffing. I don't know if it's the lack of care, because they're getting paid every Friday, so they don't understand what it's like to not be paid and to miss a paycheck. But people like me go into debt. So I'm asking that you guys please support this bill or do something that could hold Allied accountable. Like if they don't pay us over some type of glitch or something, that they be held accountable, like some type of fee or something. When my account goes into negative, I have to pay a fee for that. And can I be like reimbursed for that or something? So that's just pretty much what I'm asking. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anthony. I see Representative Christy Carpino has her hand raised. Representative Carpino, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony, thank you for coming to testify, and thank you for the work that you do and the clients that you serve. Just a few technical questions to put this in perspective. I suspect I know the answers, but I want to give you the respect to make sure I have them right. Do you submit your timesheets independently, or do your clients submit your timesheets?
They try to have the responsibility on our clients, because they're listed as our employer, to submit the timesheets, but not all of our clients have a fax machine. Some of them don't even have a phone, so we end up having to send the timesheets ourselves.
Okay, thank you. And then am I correct that you don't find out there's a glitch until it's essentially too late, and until you don't receive your paycheck?
Correct. So before they implemented this new program where you give them your number and they do like a call out or a text, they do a call out or a text on Thursday. Mind you, we get paid on Friday. So sometimes the call or the text doesn't come until later on in the day after 5 o'clock when they're closed. So this call out or this text is only telling you that you're going to get paid. It's not telling you that, hey, there's a problem with your timesheet and it needs to be fixed in a timely manner for you to be paid on time. It doesn't say anything like that. So if you're waiting around for 5 o'clock and you didn't get this call or this text, you're like, oh my God, am I getting paid or am I not getting paid? So yes, to answer your question, you're left on Friday wondering, am I getting paid or not, checking your account, or like me, waiting for the mailman to come.
Unfortunately, I was afraid that was you're going to be your answer. And then just one final question. Have you or any of your colleagues, because you were kind enough to mention that this is happening to far more than you, has anybody reached out to the Department of Labor or filed complaints directly with the Department of Labor in the past, since this has seemed to be happening quite often?
Yes, we definitely have reached out to the Department of Labor, but I'm not sure the technical answer for that. But I know that we've run into a problem with them saying that the consumer is our employer. So that's our problem right now, that we're not trying to attack the consumers because we provide services to them, but they're listed as our employer. So if anything happens, that they're trying to have all the responsibility fall back onto them, when it's actually Allied that's processing the timesheets incorrectly or just late.
Thank you for helping fill in some of the real details. There's no reason for this to be happening, so I appreciate your time and you being kind enough to answer my detailed questions. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
No
Mr.
worries. Thank you so much for asking.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions or comments, thank you for your time and your advocacy today, sir. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a blessed day.
Up next, Lynn Zimmer, followed by Linda Sinkowitz, followed by Carol Blackburn. Lynn Zimmer present.
Yes, I'm here.
Good afternoon.
You have to bear with me. I have aphasia and I've had another stroke.
Please take your time.
Thing I would like you all to think about. Let's say you work for somebody else and you don't get your paycheck and they say, oh, I'll get it to you next week. And they don't give your paycheck. So it's you have 2 paychecks not come. And then they say, oh, there's a glitch the bank has. Do you think that employer should get fined or have consequences for what they're doing? Well, I think they do. Because if you live paycheck to paycheck, what are you going to do? Your mortgage is due, your clients need paid, everybody needs paid, but your employer is not putting the money out you made. This is an important bill. You must what do I say? Vote for this bill, please. It's important. These people need paid. I'm called by Allied too many times just to change dates most of the time. And I know that means my worker is not going to get paid again because Allied needs to change dates or they didn't fill this out right. It drives me nuts. They should they know what dates they did. So just do what they have to. Stop. They called the worker. This isn't right. Do they have to call us all the time? Apparently. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmer, for your testimony. Appreciate you being here. See no questions. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for your patience with our committee today, and hope you have an, Representative Santiago has her hand. Representative Santiago, you have a question?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Ms. Zimmer. I just want to thank you for coming here to testify today and for being brave in support of this bill and in support of the people that work for LI and not getting compensated. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you. I do support this. This is horrible. I come from Washington State. This is all new. I don't understand how these caregivers. This is horrible. In Washington, I had caregivers, but Anthony is my caregiver. He does so much for me. It's unbelievable, and sometimes he doesn't get paid. That's unreal. Who does that?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And I just heard Senator Murphy say this morning that Connecticut has more towns that are what's it called? I can't cuss. More towns in Connecticut that are so poor. Like, I couldn't believe that. But they are. This community is so small. You know, I come from a big state. This is a small state. These people need, caregivers need to be, they need to be treated like nurses, RNs, PNs, because they come into people's homes. Anthony does everything for me, and now I'm partially blind. So I need even more help from Anthony, and his greatest. And, you know, he can't even get a name tag. What the Sorry.
Now.
Right?
Well,
Yeah, get a name tag. What it would have helped when I was in hospital, him coming to see me, that he had a name tag to show the people in the hospital that he was my caregiver. You know, it would have helped.
Well,
but he had all these loops to go through to come in.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that thank you again for your testimony. Thank you for your advocacy. And I know it seems like you built a really good relationship with Anthony and you really depend on him. So thank you for coming in, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me offer those comments.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Santiago. Thank you, Ms. Zimmer. Appreciate you being here today. Appreciate your advocacy. Thank you for being here. Have a nice afternoon. Next up is Linda Sinkowitz, followed by Carol Blackburn, followed by Michelle Cologne. Linda present? I see her, but I'm not sure if she's.
Yes, I'm here. I can't, for some reason, I am not getting the camera is not coming up. I sincerely apologize. I'm trying to get it to come up. Oh, here's the thing. They sent me a little button. There I
There you
am.
are. How are you? Good to see you.
Oh, thank you.
Please proceed.
Okay, so Chairman Flexer and Fox, Ranking Members Sampson and Mastro Francesco, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on proposed bills number 6325 and SJ number 13, and express my firm support of bill number 6325, requiring the Secretary of State to only follow what the law presently requires and not allow the Secretary of State to propose any declaratory rulings, instruction, opinion, or written order without the consent of the legislature, including the mailing of unsolicited absentee ballot request forms. I am firmly opposed to SG number 13 allowing 16-year-olds to pre-register to vote, and I'm opposed to early voting until the system in Connecticut is fixed. As the founder and CEO of Fight Voter Fraud, Inc., a 501c4 nonprofit organization, we firmly believe in one vote for one legal voter. In the state of Connecticut, this again is not happening. During the August primary, 1.2 million unsolicited absentee ballot request forms were sent to the registered voters by the Secretary of the State. 110,000 came back undeliverable, meaning 8% were sent to voters that no longer lived at the address listed on the Secretary of State voter rolls. Many had moved and some had died, making the unsolicited absentee ballot request forms ripe for nefarious means. For the November 2020 election, another million were sent out, making that over 2.2 million. Again, unsolicited, and the number of undeliverable cannot be accurately tallied since this time the Secretary of State had the returns sent to the local clerks. There was no requirement by the Secretary of State to get an accurate accounting of the undeliverable. These unsolicited absentee ballot request forms for November also included those original 110,000 sent back in August. They were not removed from the voter rolls, and in many cases, they still have not been removed. What a waste of Connecticut taxpayer dollars. Well, we're told it's from a federal grant. Well, guess whose money and taxes went to pay for the mailing of the unsolicited absentee ballot request forms? Yours and mine. Where's the accountability? Proposed bill number 6325 is a common sense approach to the problem of overreach in our Connecticut voter laws. If you vote for one law concerning the constitutional voting rights of Connecticut citizens, vote to approve this bill. Vote to do what you are elected to do, protect the rights of Connecticut citizens. Why is there such a rush to change our voting laws without doing any due diligence to see where the issues are? Why does it take a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization like Fight Voter Fraud, Inc. to uncover and point out the issues with these proposed changes to our voting rights? For that matter, we are constantly being attacked in these hearings when we are just the messenger coming forward to enlighten the elected body on the issues within the Connecticut voter database. In conclusion, clean the voter rolls and limit the ability of the Secretary of State to continue to violate our constitutional voting rights. Vote in favor of proposed bill number 6325. And thank you for the time to speak at this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate your testimony, your advocacy here today. Seeing Representative Thomas, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Linda. Good to see you again.
Hello.
I hope questions aren't perceived as attacks. I have a quick question since you're here about Section 7 of 6325. I have not done a lot of research into electronic signature verifications, but I thought you might have. This bill calls for a potential pilot program, and I was curious just upon reading it. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Representative.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, my headset is doing something odd. It felt like a lot of new equipment might be needed, and registrars might have to put in a lot more staff time, etc. So I just wondered if you could speak to that, if you happen to have any info.
Yes. The one I'm going to point to is Colorado. Colorado has the signature verification system. It took them 5 to 7 years to implement it. And what it does is you sign a lot of things within the government, motor vehicle, your driver's license, and it collects your signatures on file because we know that your signature does change over time. So it's a culmination of a number of your signatures through the years, and the system itself verifies that it's you. And if it isn't you or gets kicked out, that's when they have a live person go and look at it and see whether or not it is your signature. But yes, a type of system like this, if done correctly, would take 5 to 7 years with the proper equipment, with the proper database in place. But it is doable. It definitely is doable. It's not going to happen.
Thank you for that. I did Google trying to find the cost because it seemed like a lot of states were using like handheld scanners, or even more states were doing things like pulling a hard copy from a file somewhere. And it some of the sort of anecdotal data I saw, what was happening, there were some problems with what the remedy is. So meaning a scanner picks up the difference and then it usually goes to some sort of bipartisan group to look at it. But then if they disagreed, it had to go to another, like a election court or something had to be set up. So I could definitely see why it would take 5 to 7 years to set up. But there also seem to be a lot of discrepancies around which signature is pulled, meaning, is it the DMV signature? Is it the signature from the last election or when they first enrolled to vote? So it did seem very complicated. So I really just wanted to get a sense of like what the hidden costs might be, because it did feel like a lot of staff time and equipment and whatnot, especially since Connecticut, everything is so decentralized.
Well, the first thing, Representative, is what is your vote worth to make sure that your vote actually counts? And the second thing on this happens to be that they don't just take one signature. The computerized program is looking at all of your signatures that they have on file. So it's not just your DMV from when you were 16 years old. I mean, not going to have the little hearts on the eyes, because as we get older, we change our signature. So that process in Colorado is actually one that seems to be the best that we've seen cost-wise. I'm not sure, but I know Dominic Rapini is going to be testifying a little later. He actually had firsthand knowledge of the Colorado system. So when he comes on to testify, I would love if you would ask him that question.
I may, thank you. I think my right to vote is priceless. But at the same time, I remember, I forget, I can't cite it, but I'm happy to send it if I remember. I did see a study somewhere, I forget who did it, Pew or someone, saying that in terms of fraud in elections, that type of fraud is the lowest. Like most people aren't trying to commit fraud. If anyone is trying to do that by signing and forging someone's name, usually it's just a matter of a mistake. But I think Colorado does have a system, or some states have a system that check multiple points. So correct. If the signature doesn't match, then they check address or, some other things. Anyway, sorry, I feel like I could talk about these things forever, but I do try to be respectful of the public. So I'll let us get back to it, but I appreciate that. If you happen to find out costs, let me know, because I can't find it anywhere.
Okay,
Thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. See no further questions, comments. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate your time and efforts. Thank you for being here, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Up next, Carol Blackburn, followed by Michelle Colon, followed by John Murphy and Catherine Newton-Jones. Carol, how
Hello.
are you? Please begin.
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
All right. I'm having a little bit of difficulties with my camera at the moment, but without that being said, let me start. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, yes, we can hear you, we can see you.
All right, awesome. So good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and members of the committee. My name is Michelle Colon, and I lived in Bridgeport for 24 years now. Right after my high school, I had gotten my CNA license, and I've been doing it ever since. So I started in 2016. That's when I got my license and started this field. And I consider my consumer as family, and I've been with her for almost 2 years now. She's almost like a grandmother to me. My consumer's family really appreciates my work as well, and I really love this family. And caring for someone who has advanced dementia has taught me so much about caring for people with that illness. For example, there's has to do with patience and giving love and understanding where they're coming from. And this job isn't easy. I don't recommend it for everyone that doesn't have a passion for it. I have a strong passion for it. I love my job, and I'll keep doing this for years to come. Give me 1 second, sorry. We don't always get the recognition we deserve though. I'm young and people often assume I don't have enough experience or skills to be treated as a professional, which really bothers me sometimes. But of the state of Connecticut also doesn't treat us as professionals because we don't have paid time off or health insurance, and we deserve those things to have the same stability that we provide our consumers. And I've only been with Allied since last July, but my pay has been late about 4 to 5 times. And earlier this month, I submitted my timesheet in advance of the deadline by email, but my pay didn't show up on that Friday, which was very sad. I woke up crying, etc. And I was upset. And when I initially complained, the Workforce Council ignored me for the first 4 days, and I reached out almost daily, but it took like 6 days for them to fix my pay. And that was kind of sad because I had deadlines due, like for rent, etc., stuff like that, which put me in a bad situation at that point in time. And I was very upset. I even had proof that I had done everything correctly, that they received my files and everything like that. But they still didn't pay me on time. They ignored me for like 4 days, like I did say. Sorry if I'm repeating myself. And I feel hurt because I'm a good worker. I'm extremely loyal. I work hard. And I felt angry as well because I shouldn't have to wake up crying every day wondering when do I get my next pay, because I live paycheck to paycheck, sadly. And, if you don't get paid at a certain time and you have bills due,
Your
all you
3
could do is
minutes is
stress and
now
cry.
over.
Oh, geez. Oh, no.
Thank you, Ms. Cologne, for your testimony.
Mhm.
Are there
Thank you.
any questions or comments from Ms. Cologne?
I don't have any questions at the moment, except that I really believe this bill should be passed 100%. We are hard workers, and with COVID and everything, we're risking our lives out here on the daily, and we should just be getting paid on time and have a little bit more support, because we have our clients back and your back. We just need our backs covered next.
Thank you very much for your comments and your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Have a nice day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
I think we may have lost number 20, Carol Blackburn. So if she comes back, we'll go back to her. We now move on to number 22, John Murphy. I believe is submitted written testimony, will not be testifying. Number 23, Catherine Newton-Jones. Catherine Newton-Jones. I believe she's here, but not activated her. Louise Consiglio.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Jones. Ms. Newton-Jones.
Yes.
How are you?
Good.
Can you please activate your camera if possible? There you are. Thank you. Please begin.
Okay, just a minute. Let's see. Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and members of the community.
Excuse me,
My
Ms.
name
Jones,
is-
can you just please activate your camera when you're testifying, please?
Excuse me?
Can you activate your camera when testifying if possible?
I can't do that.
You can't.
No, I
Okay.
can't do it. Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and members of the community. My name is Catherine Jones Newton, and I am a consumer in the Medicaid waiver program that lives in New Haven, that lives in New Haven. In 2012, I broke my hip in a bad car accident, and my mobility has been limited ever since. I have been able to stay in my home and live as much as a normal life as possible. Thanks to the help of home care workers who are paid by Allied Community Resource, I'm here today to testify in support of Senator Bill 1075. Being able to receive service in my own home has had a great impact on my quality of life after being in a facility for 6 months. I know the difference that it makes to be able to be in my home where I feel secure, comfortable, and happy. My home care workers help me in every part of my life. They help me move, take shower, make sure I take my medicine, get my groceries, clean my house, and million other small things that I might need throughout the day. They also become my friends and they support me in many times of need, and I do the same for them. Ally has paid my home care workers for the past 8 years, and I have seen the problems with Ally increasingly getting worse. Last year, for example, I faxed a timesheet to Ally and kept the fax confirmation sheet. However, on the day before the payday, Ally called to tell me that they couldn't find the timesheets for one of my workers. The worker then had to refax them herself with the cost of $6, and she still didn't get paid on payday. Instead, she had to wait over a week to get paid. My home care workers had to go around borrowing money to cover her bills, plus the late fees she incurred on top of them. In fact, I had to lend her money to get through. During another pay period, we had an additional problem when I called Ally and they told me that both of my PCA would get paid. Then I got an automatic text saying there was a problem. And when I called, they told me that the two PCA had hours overlap. Except they were wrong. There were no overlap, and the PCA timesheet was filled out correctly. And I'm asking that you support this bill.
Thank you for testimony, Catherine. Appreciate you being here. Any questions or comments for Catherine? Seeing that, I wish you well in your recovery, ma'am. Thank you for taking time to testify today. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Louise Consiglio. I'm not sure if she's with us any longer. Adrian Cotrain. Number 26, Sharon Thorntonson, followed by number 27, Mary Caruso. Sharon Thorntonson, present. I see Adrian. Right, Adrian, you're still on mute. If you can unmute yourself, you can. There you go. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Hear me now, Adrian Cochran?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and members of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. My name is Adrian Cochran, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Hartford Region and a resident of Bloomfield. It is my honor to support House Bill 6211, an act concerning gender and racial diversity on certain state-appointed boards, commissions, committees, and councils, and an online system for consideration of appointments within the legislative department. YWCA Hartford Region is committed to ensuring diversity and racial, social, and gender equity remains at the forefront of our work in the community. This commitment extends to ensuring gender and racial diversity across all levels of local and state civic engagement. It is crucial that women, especially women of color, take their seat at every table where decisions impacting their lives are made. HB 6211 seeks to promote racial and gender equity in a way that drastically changes the landscape of policy recommendations by making sure that the makeup of state boards and commissions reflect the vibrant and diverse population of Connecticut citizens. YWCA Hartford Region also supports the development of public education and outreach to underrepresented communities to help recruit diverse members of a board or commission. When the voices and perspectives of traditionally marginalized communities are part of the decision-making process, everyone wins and more equitable outcomes are realized. Inclusive legislation such as HB 6211 is an important first step in improving the quality of life for all Connecticut citizens. I stand in support of House Bill 6211, an act concerning gender and racial diversity on state boards and commissions, and ask members of this committee to join me in supporting this important measure. Thank you for your time, your consideration, and your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today and your patience with the committee as you work through the Zoom format meetings. Appreciate that. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you again for your advocacy and for being here today. Appreciate your testimony. Thank you for being here. Up next, we had a bit of a technological glitch earlier, so we're going to go back to number 20, Carol Blackburn, who was with us on the phone, followed by number 26, Sharon Thorntonson. Ms. Blackburn, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
I apologize about the technical issues earlier.
That's okay. It does happen. Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, and members of the committee. My name is Carol Blackburn. I live and work in Norwich, Connecticut as a PCA. I'm here today to testify in support of Senate Bill 1075. I have been caring for my mother as her PCA for a little over a year now. While I've only been a PCA for a year, I've been a caregiver my whole life. After receiving my CNA certification at Bayview and East Lyme, I worked as a CNA for 10 years in the state. My work as a CNA was in different settings, including nursing homes and hospice. It's no surprise I'm drawn to this kind of work because my mother was a registered nurse, and growing up, I wanted to be just like her. Now my mother is retired and is total care, relying on PCAs to help her with every task. I love caring for my mom. She raised me, and so it's now my turn to return the favor to care for her. With that said, it's incredibly difficult work. I'm not my mom's only PCA, so there are times when I have help, but there are also many times I do not. This is a very physically demanding job. During these times, I aid my mother with everything, including moving her, cleaning her, feeding her, helping her with meds, medication, and more. I do the paperwork for payroll as I'm the only PCA. We need a company that does their job effectively. Allied does not. Currently, there's a backlog of workers who have suffered from COVID-19 viruses in various ways, still waiting to get 2-week emergency paid and sick leave. We won't last spring processed and approved. Timesheets are always a big issue. Today, I'm here to ask for your help to make sure Allied is held accountable. We're not asking for a handout. We're asking for people to be paid for the services we provide. We and our consumers should be able to have a payroll system we can count on, and I don't think that's asking too much. Please help us make a fairly timely pay the reality we deserve. Please pass Senate Bill 1075. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll gladly answer.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn, for your testimony, your patience with us. Any question or comments for Ms. Blackburn? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony today. Appreciate you being here and appreciate your efforts on behalf of your mother. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Have a great day.
As well, thank you. Up next, Sharon Thorntonson, who I think we may have lost moments ago. See if we can get her back on. Mary Caruso, followed by Dominic Rapini. Ms. Caruso,
Hi,
good afternoon. How are you?
fine, thanks. How are you?
Good. Please continue.
Good afternoon, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox, Senator Sampson, Representative Master Francesco, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about SB 1075, an act concerning payroll service providers. My name is Mary Caruso. I live in North Branford with my 2 adult children who live their lives with physical disabilities. They receive services through a DSS Medicaid waiver, and they hire, train, and direct their personal care assistants through self-direction. The men and women who work in our home as PCAs are amazing and considered members of our family. Our home is filled with mutual dignity, respect, and love. I have also been a member of the PCA Workforce Council since 2012, but I am testifying today as a family member who sees life through many lenses. I am not representing any opinion of the Workforce Council. The hard work of our PCAs should be respected, and they should always be paid on time. It is the consumer employer who should ensure that that is done. And the consumer employer should be trained and guided by the respective state agencies regarding the importance of upholding the responsibilities as an employer in Connecticut. I stand behind the importance of that philosophy. I also stand strongly behind the principle of self-direction, as well as respecting consumer employers and adhering to the privacy of people living with disabilities. This is the 3rd time our family has submitted testimony, and I am concerned that the voice of the consumer employer seems to be chipped away a little more in each of these 3 bills. The consumer employer's voice should never be left out of any of the dialogue between PCAs and any payroll service provider. Specifically, to suggest conversation should happen without informing a consumer employer threatens the philosophy of self-direction and silences the voice of those who have fought so hard to have one. With each testimony, we have asked members of committees to please reach out to their own constituents who may be lost in the sea of consumer employers in Connecticut, and to please ask them real-life questions to help you make the right decisions. Our family is always happy to help in any way, and no question is ever too sensitive for any of us. Any dialogue is a step towards open communication, good working relationships between employers and PCAs, and the ability for all lives to be lived well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Caruso, for being here today, for providing your testimony. If you don't mind me asking, how old are your children, Ms. Caruso, if you don't mind me asking?
I always hate to say my adult children. It seems like an oxymoron, but they are 30 and 34.
Very nice. Just out of curiosity, and I imagine maybe I don't want to. If the payments are not made or withheld, does that have a negative impact on the home, on your home? Do you see it in that sense?
Honestly,
not negative impact, but does it have like a? I'm trying. Is there a reaction or a different?
No, there's no. If you mean if there's some kind of stop of care, no. We have not seen problems. My son has been with Allied since 2005 and my daughter since 2008. We have a long history, but we have not had problems.
From the dynamics, but it's just very difficult for the individual not to be paid, knowing what beneficial service they provide your family, then not be paid must be very difficult, imagine, for you or your family to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, we, I think there's a few huge missing pieces, and that's the relationship between the employer and the PCA in the responsibility. I noticed one testimony, someone had mentioned that it's ridiculous that dates all had to be changed. The payroll service providers have responsibilities. And I know in the past we have made mistakes on timesheets. We aren't using paper timesheets any longer. We were a pilot family for the EVV system. So we now, everything is electronic, which alleviates a lot of those mistakes. But, you know, I know over the past years, there have been times where maybe a Monday was December 1st and the PCA mistakenly wrote December 2nd Monday, which creates a problem that, you know, needs to be fixed. But every step of the way, either one of my two kids would be involved in ensuring that those mistakes were done in a timely manner, taken care of, so that the pay could be done. I truly believe there's a dialogue that needs to happen. It may be a working group. I know Kathy Flaherty, an attorney from the Legal Rights Project, had suggested a working group. I think it's important for all stakeholders to understand the procedures and protocol. You know, DSS and DDS play a major role in this also. I firmly believe open communication in understanding the program and how it works is a missing piece in this. It's not just about, you know, mistakes being made. It's what you can do to make the mistakes less and what can be done to move forward to make the program a better working program. We have wonderful PCAs here. I mean, it's a very well-oiled machine in our household, and it's necessary because both Sam and Alex, my two kids, they both work, they exercise, they volunteer, they lead very busy lives, which they would not be able to do without their PCAs. So they're a great group here.
We're very lucky to have you two as an advocate. So I thank you for being here today. Thank you for your advocacy and look forward to working with you in the days ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon. Up next, Dominic Rapini, followed by Danielle Delmonico, followed by Richard Cowes. Dominic.
Good afternoon. And once again, thank you, Chairman Senator Fox and Chairman and Representative Flexer, Ranking Member Senator Sampson and Representative Gail Mastro-Francesco. It's a privilege to be here today sharing my insights and observations on Connecticut's election issues, something that is really becoming a growing passion for me. And I think we have a lot of room for growth in this area. I'm especially concerned today about some issues that come up in Senate Bill SJ 13, where I'm going to focus on. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dominic Rapini. I'm a lifelong Connecticut resident, a Connecticut voter for over 40 years. I'm the board chair, and I work with Linda Sienkiewicz on the nonprofit Fight Voter Fraud Incorporated. You know, our goal is to enlighten Connecticut voters on issues regarding election integrity. You know, we believe that election integrity requires data integrity, which has become an increasing focus of ours. So as we talk about this bill today, three things I want to touch on: the bandwidth of our election workforce, voting centers briefly, and the veracity of 16-year-olds getting registered to vote early. So one of my big concerns is the bandwidth of our election workforce. We have some amazing talented registrars, 338 of them across 169 towns, Republicans and Democrats alike. But this is a workforce that is very small. Most of them are part-time, and the 45% of them are over the age of 70. And this is a group that we want to ask. We're asking them to do a lot. We're asking them to process up to 15,000 election day registrations, to vet and verify, 650,000 absentee ballots are coming in. The enormous amount of work coming in, and now we want them to do a protracted 14-hour days for extended voting or early voting, which I think is doable, but not until we get this group more help. One of the things that you first see where you see the cracks in the system is in the data. Last week, we talked about 103 people who potentially double voted. Yesterday, we released information at Fight Voter Fraud about 6 people that voted under the age of 18 that slipped through the cracks. And most recently, and in my testimony that I submitted today, and you'll see this more next week, we saw that out of those 15,000 people, or just under 15,000, that registered and voted on the same day on November 3rd, 2020, 5,700 of them were not actually formally registered until days, weeks, or months later, which tells us that our registrars don't have the bandwidth to properly vet these people and to get them processed on the election day. So something's going to have to give if we're going to do this, and we're going to do early voting. And I think this is something we got. It's important. Regarding voting centers, I think it's a great idea, but it's only going to happen if we do two things. One is primarily we got to provide a standardized investment in electronic poll books across the state, so that every precinct has an electronic poll book, because you have to be able to forecast them a ballot you have, and you have to have real-time information on the people and where they voted, so that you see real-time what's going to happen. So I think we can do that, but that's really going to be front and center for this committee's planning. And finally, 16-year-olds. You know, we're looking at a scenario where we're going to ask 16-year-olds to be able to register to vote at that age of 16. And in some cases, we might be asking them to tell them they can vote for municipal elections. Well, we're going to create a situation that's going to be very hard to manage. Imagine somebody voting for mayor one year and said, oh, next year you can't vote for the governor or for Congress, right? And be able to manage these two different voting profiles in that group is, I don't think we have the systems to be able to manage it. But furthermore, about 16-year-olds, you know, by and large, the Hills-Harris poll in 2019, told us that most voters, 84% of all U.S. voters, don't want 16-year-olds voting. We saw an ABC poll in Washington, D.C. last year.
Your 3 minutes is now over.
Thank you, Jenna. Where we saw that 77% of the people were against that 16-year-olds voting. And then when we look at that age group of 18 to 29, in the 2014 election, the U.S. Census Bureau did research and said that only 60% of eligible voters between the ages of 18 and 29 actually voted. So the point here is with 16-year-olds is, yeah, I would love to get these kids more civically engaged, but that has to be organic, and I don't think it can be legislated. So that completes my testimony, and I don't have a lot of time today because I got to get back to work. It's been a great session today, but I can answer a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rapini. Seeing no questions or comments, appreciate your time and advocacy, and hope you can get back to work.
Oh, it's an early day. Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Goodbye,
care.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Up next is Danielle Delmonico, followed by Richard Cowes, followed by Sharon Thorstenson.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking this time. I know week by week you're doing a lot on these Zooms. My name is Danielle Delmonico. I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and I am my mother's PCA. I am here to speak about the Senate bill on 1075 today. I became a PCA in 2016 after my mother broke her shoulder, and I was caring for her. It was her Agency on Aging that introduced me to the PCA program. From there, I then was interviewed for 3.5 hours by an allied worker on how to do my timesheets so that they would be successful. 3 months into the program, my pay issues started to have issues. I own my own fax machine. They then claimed that they would never receive the faxes, even though I own my own fax machine. In nearly 4 years since we've been with Allied, we've had nothing but problems. In the last 4 years, my pay has been late or incorrect almost 54 times now. That means 54 times that I'm not confirmed of a receipt of my timesheet. That means 53 or 4 times I couldn't pay my bills on time. And of course, when it comes to this, my mom and I felt that the work I do and the care she receives from me is not valued enough by Allied or the state. And if our work was truly valued, we would get paid on time. We wouldn't have these difficulties. The CEO herself, Mrs. Bonnet, asked me to fax 3 different fax numbers every week for one timesheet. That's on top of my PDF, and since the beginning of February 2020 using EVV and Callin. And that does not stop them from messing up my payroll. I have also talked with B&B about them. They are very aware of this company. I shouldn't have to go into all this explanation, and I shouldn't have to be panicked every Thursday night to be confirmed if I'm getting a receipt of a paycheck deposited the following Friday. It's disgusting of how this company operates and how many years the state has allowed them to do this. And I only think this came up purposely because of COVID. It woke it up. And there was a fact that when they were being babysat, not one of us 10,000 PCAs had one issue with our payroll. But once COVID got more relaxed, that's when we started having payroll issues all over again with Allied. And now, of course, the EVV is not even being calculated in with my timesheets that I do paper. So why have I been doing the EVV and the call-in since February 20? And if Allied's going to get passed again, I think we need to start really looking at this instead of being treated like a second-class caregiver. And seriously think not just about me, but of course my mother, who's the consumer. She goes through this anxiety because she sees her daughter go through this anxiety. I just want to thank you. And I really hope today you could really think about passing this Senate bill of 1075 to hold Allied Community Resources Payroll Company. And if not, I am more than happy to introduce you to a couple of new payroll companies that would work fine with the state. Thank you for this opportunity and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Danielle, for your testimony. Appreciate you being here today. See no questions. Hope you have a nice afternoon. Thank you for your testimony. Up next, Richard Cowes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Please, yes, please begin.
Yes. Sego, Uni, Nogoshke, Kuatonk, Enuko, Richard Soaring Bear Cows from the Golden Hill Augusta Tribal Nation. Thank you, and it's good to be here with you, honored members of the Connecticut State Legislature. Come from the Golden Hill Augusta Tribal Nation, and I'm here in support of House Bill 6203 for the proposed Freedom of Information Act exemption for the certain Native American cultural records provided to state agencies and state institutions of higher learning for the purpose of having our ancestors and sacred items returned to us following the process of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. The tribe urges the state legislature to consider this vital FOIA exemption, which addresses and seeks to remedy human rights and freedom of religion infractions suffered by the indigenous peoples in Connecticut and nationwide. By requesting this exemption, we're seeking to protect the identity of ancestors, the sacredness of cultural items, and of course, the sanctity of Native American culture, ceremony, and religion, and to impose European American systems of knowledge and belief on indigenous peoples compounds the colonial practices and continuous oppression of indigenous peoples' rights to freedom of religion. To follow the NAGPRA process, we must share certain confidential information, the details of which are not required as part of the reporting process under NAGPRA. And without this proposed exemption, we are forced into a position that violates our human rights. So to access our ancestors and items essentially to our spirituality, religion, and identity, things that were stolen from us, we risk the cultural erasure of those things by making them subject to FOIA. Tabatne, and thank you for allowing your time, and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Richard, for your testimony. See no questions or comments. I appreciate being here. Thank you for your advocacy today. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, Greg Myers, who I don't believe is with us, followed by Sharon Thorntonson, followed by Ann Manuski. Sharon, I think you're back with us now. Sharon, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself, please, Sharon? We can't hear you, Sharon. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Sharon. No, we still can't hear you. Maybe if you give it, we'll go on to Ann Manuski. We'll come back to you, Sharon. That's okay. We'll go on to the next speaker, then come back to you after that if we can. See if we can get this resolved. Ann Manuski, you're next, followed by Sharon Thorntonson. Ann, please begin.
Thank you, Representative Fox. Chairman and members of the Government Administration and Elections Committee, I have provided several pieces of testimony on bills in regard to elections, our state elections. One is on 63-2025 in regard to support for an act concerning the Secretary of State absentee ballots and election audits. That these, there were issues under our COVID lockdown that changes were made to our election laws. And we really need to have some reviews that aren't in our ordinary laws that need to be done due to the changes in the absentee ballot process. I also provided testimony in regard to support of SB 301, an act concerning bipartisan review of the emergency declarations. Again, due to COVID, I believe my rights were infringed where we did not have bipartisan support in making this emergency declaration, which unfortunately we are still under. And this is a great concern to the freedom of the citizens of Connecticut. We need to open up our state. And I hope that this will never happen again. But if it does, we need to have bipartisan support in the legislature to get us out of this type of issue. And the last one is pardon me, testimony in support of, or I'm sorry, it's not support, testimony. It's in opposition of SJ 13 in regard to allowing 16-year-olds to be electors in our elections. 16-year-olds are teenagers. They are not ready to have the weight of making judicious decisions on who to elect as their representatives. They are, as I understand it, we changed the laws from 21 to 18 due to concerns that people at the age of 18 were fighting battles for our country, going to war, and graduating from high school. To have 16-year-olds to be electors, they're still in high school. So I am against that bill. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann, for your testimony. See no question or comments. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate your patience. Hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. You have a nice day too.
I think that's the only individual I have on my list. Unless Greg Myers is president, I don't think he is, and Sharon, I think we may have lost. Okay, so seeing no further individuals here to testify, I think we'll call this public hearing to a close. Next public hearing is on Friday at 1 p.m. Look forward to seeing everyone then. Have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and patience today.
Hi, everybody.